William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I welcome you to another Two Hats special of community events. Let's look in and see what's really happening.
David King, the councilman for served on the homelessness.
Troy Broussard, Dallas Housing Authority.
Ann Johnson, Family Gateway Housing Subcommittee.
Al with Dallas Housing Crisis.
Lindy B. with the Bridge.
Larry James with State Square.
Jim Mobile with Metro Care Services.
Steve Davis, District 9.
Susan Spelman with Carson.
Made volunteer for MDHA.
Deanna Johnson Thomas with UT Southwestern and Baylor Reynolds. Tanya Reagan, the appointee for District 1.
Zach Rose, appointed for District 14.
Kristen Michael, Ashley Rogers with United Way.
Jane Dunn with the Bridge.
Blake Donovan with Solid Sherman. And I'm Kelly O'Brien here as a guest, and I work for CSH.
I'm Rick Donosky. Director of the College Football Playoff Foundation, and I also serve on the board of MDHA.
I'm Bob Wright. I'm here on behalf of the Social Measures Department in Dallas.
I'm Bill Coleman. I'm a partner at McKinsey & Company. Consulting Group here in Dallas.
Just in the nick of time. Will? Yeah. So, as is, I think, important for us, we have a period of open microphone. Jim, welcome. Open microphone, and so let's go ahead and do that. I'll remind the speakers that 2 to 3 minutes is about the range that we're talking about in terms of your comments, and it's not an opportunity for a lot of Q&A and discussion, but an opportunity for you to share your thoughts with the commission. So let's start with Jeff, if Jeff is here. Jeff? Okay. So we'll go down the list to Shirley. Shirley Williams?
Jeff is here, he's right here.
Okay, Jeff.
Oh, we'd like you to speak now.
You're up.
And where do I go? Where's the microphone?
I think you can just jump into Ken's spot right there.
I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jeff.
My name is Jeff Evolved. I live in Oak Lawn now. I am 63 years old. The reason I'm here is to comment on the state of homelessness in Dallas. I was homeless from October 28th through September 10th, and have now successfully found a place to live and am semi-retired and work part-time. During the time that I was homeless, I stayed at 2 shelters, the Salvation Army shelter and Dallas Light. I see that Reverend Sweeney is here, whom I never met, whom I never saw at the homeless shelter. I believe that if you're going to have meaningful reform and not have repetition of the 10 cities, that not only does there need the issue of the lack of affordable housing need to be addressed, but there also needs to be reform of the way that the shelters are run and the way that they're held accountable. My solution would be to create a permanent commission that would report to the county commissioners and the city council, made up of representatives appointed by those organizations. That organization, the commission would submit annual reports to both bodies. Other duties that the commission would have would include monitoring the performance of every meaningful shelter, private or public. Specifically, how many people are staying at the shelters, what are the vacancy rates versus non-vacancy, that kind of thing. The other issues things that the commission should include would be the ability to handle complaints, be a source for the residents to go to that is not tied to the shelter specifically. Also, the shelters, the commission would have a fundraising capacity because almost every shelter in the system, public and private, doesn't have enough money to do what it should be doing properly. And if that permanent commission has professional fundraisers, one or more, it could raise money in much the same way that the nonprofit organizations in this community do. As far as the housing issue, as much as this might be painful for those who are, oriented toward, supporting business in this city, there needs to be an ordinance that requires every developer to set aside a percentage of its housing, not only for homeless people, but for the mentally ill that are recycling in and out of our jails, for families that are either single or both parents that have, large numbers of children or low income. So there's several age groups could be served if we address the housing situation. Not only do the developers need to have this requirement, but also the apartments. Every apartment in this city ought to be required to set aside a percentage of its housing for the homeless. You do that, you'll have an immediate pool of housing available to address the issue. I'm not sure that it would solve the problem, but it sure would go a long way in the right direction. Now,
Okay, Jeff, we got,
okay, two last things.
those are right on point, by the way. Those are things we're going to be talking about.
Two last things. This is important. You've got to, as far as the shelters are concerned, I think there needs to be consistency in how the residents are handled at every shelter, regardless of whether they're private or nonprofit. I do not believe that particularly the private shelters, and I'm specifying Salvation Army and Dallas Life in particular, do not do a good job of taking care of their residents. There's no accountability. I mean, the board of directors at these organizations can pretty much do whatever they damn well please. I'm going to give you some examples.
Yeah, I think you got to wrap it up, Jeff.
These are pertinent examples. Dallas Live, for example, their food program is a disgrace. The way they process people is
I'm going to have to ask you
unbelievably poor.
to wrap it up. Yeah.
There's also problems at Salvation Army. Every shelter needs improvements.
That's fair.
And there also needs to be consistent standards for the shelter employees.
Mr. Chairman, time.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. That was very helpful.
And people can get out of the shelter. I'm a good example of that.
Yeah. Appreciate that.
But there's got to be meaningful reform. If you don't do it now, we're losing a golden opportunity.
Yeah. We're taking our best crack at it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Robert.
Good afternoon, everybody. Is it working?
Yes.
Robert Ceccarelli. I'm here to let you know, I really believe that the task force is discriminatory and prejudicial against the homeless. Two reasons why. That one person here is homeless on the committee. And when that happens, you don't know what goes on each day with the homeless. Day in and day out. You have failed to do this completely. Second reason, there is no homeless people here speaking at all. You have failed to meet the requirements for the homeless to be heard. We have all Caucasian except one African American here. I'm not saying this, but it looks like definite bias, discrimination, and prejudice against the homeless, all right? Because there is no trying to meet the requirements of the homeless to speak here at all. You fail completely, and this needs to be done before you report to the mayor. All I hear is about affordable shelters and permanent supportive housing. The Dallas Morning News, again, for the 50th time, talks about short-term housing. I've talked to several people today before the meeting. There is no answer for short-term housing. If you do, please give it to us today, because you're really doing a disservice for the homeless the way they're living today. And I wish you discuss about what happens to the homeless during the day, but no one is doing it, so you really are completely blind what goes on during the day with the homeless. And that needs to stop and need to be discussed about it. Jay Dunn, I would hope that we get somewhere besides to bus the homeless to a meeting where all the task force members can hear about the homeless, what's going, how they're suffering. It's not being done at all. I would hope you do it at the bridge where you get everybody together, because I'm getting sick and tired of hearing about shelters, supportive housing, and other kind, because I haven't got the word for it, but affordable housing that the homeless are suffering, and you don't talk about it at all. You don't live through it. I feel like I'm going to church here with coffee and cake, and there's no passion, no urgency at all. I just talked to Mr. James, and he always talk about permanent supportive housing. That takes years, years.
So I'm gonna.
Sir, let me speak, please.
Okay,
Because
you're running out of time, so.
I've asked you, sir, to get Ms. Jones here from the county program. Where's Blake at? Blake, where you at?
Right here, Robert.
Blake, we need to get Ms. Jones to speak. And that's where I came from, Blake, and that's short-term housing. I stayed there 14 months. I hope you get Ms. Jones here, because everyone doesn't want to do it, and they refuse to have my suggestions about short-term housing. I'm tired of repeating myself. I had a task force member say, "Why I'm repeating myself?" Because you don't listen. This gentleman right over here. I'm tired of repeating myself. You don't do what you say you're going to do. Thank you very much, but please get the homeless involved. If not, I'm going to give a report to the mayor. Thank you very
We're on
much.
it. Thank you.
Mr.
Next.
Chairman, Jay's name was mentioned. He should be given 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Do you want to say anything, Jay?
No, hey, you're not supposed to talk.
I'm all for having participants.
Oh, yeah,
You're not supposed to talk.
Okay, we'll move on.
There's no rule about
You're not
that.
supposed to talk.
Leonard Harris. No, Leonard Harris. Richard. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you for this. And I agree with Robert and the man who was homeless for a number of years. I've been a homeless advocate for 13-plus years in Dallas, and I've been homeless myself. And both my mother and sister were mentally ill. It's a topic that's very close to my heart. There's a total of 12,000 to 14,000 homeless in Dallas, and it's a big secret. MDHJ put out a number a couple, 3 years ago, 3,500. Well, I think you're going to find out that that's maybe 1/3 of the number. MDHJ says this is a good number. $40,000 a year for every homeless person that's out there in the streets. If you take 5,000 times 40,000, it's $200 million a year. That's the jail and the pay later health care costs. If you look at a basic housing cost of $5,000 a year, Malva Jones, Dallas County, that's $25 million a year. Then the mentally ill, they need more attention. They need someone to attend to their needs daily. $20,000 a year times 2,000 is $40 million. So if you add the two up, it comes to $65 million a year to take care of the homeless now, not later, because the later cost is 3 times that amount. There's 3,500 homeless DISD students, 3,500. According to the great organization Family Gateway, there are 5,000 homeless mothers with children. That should bring tears to our eyes. Emergency shelter is the greatest ignored need. We need about 5,000 shelter beds. Why is the elephant in the room ignored? There's no profit in it. There's profit in permanent support housing. There's tax incentives. In New York, it's a law passed in the late 70s to provide shelter, emergency shelter, for all of its homeless. And at the time that was passed, it was 30,000 homeless. Now there may be 35 or 40,000 homeless. The savings in the jail costs and the pay later health care costs should pay for the sheltering all our homeless. But if that's not possible, well, we save money. We're not going to give you the money we save. We're not going to give you the 30, 40 million we saved in the jail. We're not going to give you the 100 million we saved in the health care cost. If not, and I spoke to Mike Fianza a number of times, he liked it, but it was not politically correct. This city does not want to admit that it has a homeless problem. So here it is. I'm going to say it again. Keep the change for the homeless at 7-Elevens, at chain stores, with a sign, may we keep the change for the homeless mothers with children. $2.45, 65 cents. $2.85, 15 cents. It's very easy, and that number becomes extremely large if you promote it and you let people know that the money truly is going to help the homeless. Thank you very much.
Great suggestion, thank you. Okay, so you all should have an agenda in front of you, and our goal is to try and work through this agenda efficiently and get us out of here at 3 o'clock. But it's going to take some work for all of us to get that done. And so if you look at your agenda, we've allocated the first 30 minutes against getting us through the other communities discussion, and then we've allocated an hour for the subcommittee reports, and then 90 minutes for kind of a strategy session. It's important that we have, I think, a sense of the timing of today, so we can get through it and we don't get to the end and realize we don't have time to talk about the big issues that are going to be important for us to tackle. So let me make a few comments, and then we'll kind of flow through the agenda. First of all, looking back, it seems like forever that we were getting started in that Audubon Park room, but it was only 8 weeks ago. And we all gathered. It was really tight quarters. It was hot, and we got working. And I can tell you I'm amazed by the positive spirit of this group, the amount of positive energy that's kind of going into the work from all of the various subcommittees. And ultimately, I'm really pleased with the amount of work that's been generated. We'll see today a lot of work product from this effort that we're going to have to sift through. And I want to say special thanks to Tanya and her group, who really lifted the community engagement task. I had no idea that you could turn out so much engagement in such a short amount of time of 8 weeks, and the survey results. And so we're going to spend some time talking about all that work, but that was really tremendous. Today, let's talk about today. Today's a big day, I think, for our group. Today is the day we test the work from each of the subgroups. So I'm going to challenge you to engage, to speak up. If there's an idea that you don't fully understand, ask questions about it, because we have to test these ideas now as a full group, because we really missed an opportunity to do that when we were together last time. And then today, I hope to, by the end of the day, develop some consensus around some strategies and recommendations that can then be put into a reporting mechanism that we can then move forward with. I'll remind people of our charge. Where is that, Bob? There it is. So we have this charge. This is what we're working with. We were going to tackle 1 and 2 at the last meeting that got canceled because of the conflict with the memorial service. So we're going to try and work through 1 and 2, but then we're going to spend the bulk of our time on 3 and try and, lift, do the heavy lift around 3. So that's today, and then let's talk a little bit about the plan going forward, just so we're all kind of set. So we have a meeting next week. Ashley, can we meet here? Where's Ashley?
Yes.
Can we meet here again? Okay, does this work for everybody? Okay, so we'll plan on meeting here again next week. And so the
Same time, same place.
yeah, we'll meet at noon. So the plan is to present an interim report to the city on August the 3rd, which is the day after we meet. So it's really important that we, stay focused and try and be in a position to deliver an interim report. But the deal is this. We have so much more work to do. We have more community engagement that needs to take place. We definitely will have more work around housing issues and around shelter issues that we're going to have to put a lot of these ideas into an immediate strategy, near term, to try and deal with our most pressing issues. And then we're going to have some other strategies that we're going to have to spend more time working on. And that's just the nature of it. I mean, in a perfect world, we'd be able to, deliver the answer, but it's very complex, and we just got to keep going. So I hope to be able to kind of get us working through the fall and wrap us up sometime before Thanksgiving. But I just want everyone to know to expect that, and I really don't see a way around it. So you have any comments or thoughts about that? People okay with that? Oh, we have another speaker. Okay. Okay, so bear with me, Harry. We'll come back to Harry if Harry's here. All right, so then let's hear from Harry, I guess. Sorry about that, Harry.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, I apologize.
Yeah, I know I got 3 minutes, I'll be fast. Is this on?
Yeah.
I want to thank you for allowing me to present my proposal on homelessness. I have the honor to speak as a public servant for 20-plus years. I worked in economic development in Garland, Texas, Matagorda County, City of Dallas. I was Director of Economic Development, and Fairfax County Housing Redevelopment Authority. I have been on supported committees like this. I've hired people for specific jobs, for ideas that cities had. I've written RFPs, hired consultants. Unfortunately, too many of the ideas and recommendations from these various methods to solve community problems like yours, you're going to write a report, never get implemented. They're not because they're not good ideas, just the opposite. The majority of these reports have fantastic ideas. I have a box of reports from Hammer, Seiler, George, a national consulting firm from the City of Dallas that was hired to solve the problem in South Dallas, which the ideas are probably still good today. From my working with government, I have found out that problems get solved when an elected official has a vested interest. So quickly, what my proposal is, my recommendation to the Committee to Solve Homelessness and Other Problems in Dallas is like the medical profession. We reached a point in the medical profession we have specialists. We have oncologists for cancer. We have other medical things. We have general practitioners, but we have specialists when you have big problems. So this is a big problem. We need to create specialists in government. Here's what my proposal is. Sorry. Where am I? The City of Dallas needs to structure the council to make an at-large position that would be solely dedicated to housing in Dallas, which includes homelessness. That person would have the same power and duties as the rest of the members of the council. That person would vote on all items, but this person would have a major input on anything that dealt with housing. This would be the housing go-to person. It's an elected official, he's at large, or she's at large, the go-to person. They focus on one thing. They would have an agenda like your report. They get elected. They would see that report. Citizens could see what their things are. They don't get distracted. Like the mayor. The mayor is sort of like this. But he gets distracted. Like 2 weeks ago, we had the unfortunate thing in Dallas. He gets distracted. We need to have at-large positions where these council members understand what's going on. Here's the advantages of this at-large position. Sorry, I'm so nervous. Would have elected official that was always pressing for solutions like homelessness. This person would have a specific performance evaluation, like I said. We would know what that person's doing. There wouldn't be any excuses. Well, I didn't get homeless done because of the potholes or something else. The other thing, the government staff would have a good person with good ideas. Staff could go to this person always. The nonprofits would know who to go to. This person would represent housing locally and nationally in Dallas. So basically what I want to do is in your proposal, you created an at-large position that would home in on housing and homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. I'm sorry that I forgot you there. Okay, so going forward, a couple of ideas about what we need to do, and then we're going to jump right into the agenda. So one, I think the work of the subcommittees needs to be ongoing. Housing, we need to figure out a financing element to it, system implementation, and feasibility analysis for some of these ideas and projects. And so to that end, I think we're going to need to engage consultants to help us. Kelly Opott is here. She works for the Corporation for Supportive Housing. She lives in Houston. She's on loan to us from the Meadows Foundation, thankfully. She did this work in Houston successfully, and so we're putting her in the game and putting the rest of her team in the game. You want to speak now or wait? Why don't you wait?
Okay.
Okay, you're coming up.
Okay.
Second, we need to continue to engage the community. The idea that we kind of get through here and we unpack a report, but then not share the results of our report with the community in an engaged way and get their feedback, it would be wrong. We've got to figure out a way to take whatever it is our ideas are, our best set of ideas, and we need to go and talk to people about it. And so, Tanya, to that point, I'm going to hope that your group is going to continue to be able to figure out the best way to do that. And then finally, and this is one that I think absolutely has to happen, we as a commission, individually and as a group, have to promote meaningful and sustainable change. The further in I get on this deal, the further concerned I am that, like one of the speakers said, we're going to publish a report, we're going to deliver it, they're going to go on about their business and do other things, and it'll go on the shelf. And we'll be back here a decade from now with the same sets of problems, the same sets of dynamics, and we'll try and figure it out because there's not a political will or a resolve in the community to prioritize this work. So I'm going to ask us all over the next 90 days to take that on as well, to make sure that we're communicating with the right people, we're engaging folks about the topic, and then we're trying to elevate the conversation to a place where we can get some meaningful and some sustainable change. So you have in your packet a document that's called Dallas Commission on Homelessness Interim Report. So Bob and I have been feeling a lot of pressure to deliver some mail here in about a week. And so we thought we'd go ahead and at least try and build the preliminary sections of the preliminary report. So when we get a focused discussion on strategies and recommendations, we can attach them to ultimately what we've got. So it flows against our charge, but it primarily has a background section that you'll see in draft form. It has a section on community engagement that we're going to fine tune after we hear that report today. And then the thing that I wanted to share with the group last time we were together is what I think is really important, and that's a section on the current environment. So I've had a chance to work with others to try and unearth, I think, the reality of our current environment. So you'll see it as a document. So if you bear with me, I'm going to paint the picture for you of our current homelessness environment, best I can tell. And it's not a pretty picture, and I've tried to moderate to the extent I think it's reasonable to moderate, but this is kind of what we're looking at. First of all, we've got a huge poverty issue in Dallas. It's no secret. We have 300,000 people in our community living in extreme poverty. We have 500,000 people living in households that are distressed from a housing standpoint. That's the reality. Most of it's concentrated in the southern sector of Dallas. Number two, we've had a long and challenging history as it relates to fair housing. All you got to do is Google fair housing Dallas, and you're going to read a litany of history that goes back, Troy, how long?
1930s.
Yeah. So we have this history that is not pretty, but we've not been able to basically figure out how to address an affordable housing dynamic and address a fair housing dynamic in the way the federal government wants us to as they allocate dollars to us. Fair, it's probably no easier way to say it than that, no straighter way. So it's rough reading. Bob's got this document that we haven't attached yet, that if you really want to see the document and follow the court cases, talk to Bob, send him an email. It's probably too shocking to put into our report. Our homeless population. Someone said that we were counting homeless and we undercounted. Well, of course, if we're doing a point-in-time count, it's undercounted. No question about it, because it's just how many people you count in one night. But the annualized numbers that we've gotten from other metrics pushes our number of homeless north of 10,000. Richard, I think you're spot on. Most are men, majority black, 300 veterans in our community. 75% of the unsheltered have had experience with the criminal justice system. Over 700 live on the streets, bridges, cars. And so the largest encampments are in the downtown area, but there's at least 60 encampments, according to some information I got from Dave Hogan, who joined us there, all around the city. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. And then we've got this other data that strongly suggests the number is even more extreme. We do have the 3,700 enrolled DISD students. We've got Jay's number with respect to the number you serve at the bridge, which is north of 8,000?
Yeah, about
9,000. So you add all this up, and we definitely have a bleak picture as it relates to our homeless population. We have a nonprofit organization, a series of nonprofit organizations that are part of a thing called the Continuum of Care. This is the federal government mandated organization to control federal flow of funds around homelessness. And there are 42 nonprofit organizations in that group. We pull down about $16 million a year. We leave millions of dollars on the table because our system is horribly misaligned. We haven't prioritized the system. We don't have a coordinated assessment element to it put against it. And we have a major data gap. We can't even tell you how many homeless folks we have, or how many beds we have, or how many housing opportunities we have, because we don't have a data system to support it at this point. We don't have everyone into a single HMIS system. So that's disappointing, and it's got to be a priority. The super utilizers of our system, someone mentioned it, I think maybe Richard or someone mentioned it. We have super utilizers of our system. They're in and out of the jail, in and out of our hospitals, in and out of our county and city facilities at such a rate that by even the most modest prediction, it costs the community $40,000 to $80,000 a year to manage that population. And these are mostly our chronically homeless in our community. And so the cost is astronomical when you add up the system-wide services allocated to super utilizers. Should I go on? All right. We have shelters. We have 5 major shelters that provide most of the housing, transitional housing, I think, and also shelter bed capacity. In aggregate, in talking to them last week, 2,000 night beds are available across those 5 shelters, approximately. So we're at about 95% capacity. 4 of the 5 are at full capacity right now. One of the 5 has about 140 beds.
Which 5 shelters are you talking about? Let's be specific.
Okay, this is not a hostile environment. I'll be happy. It's all going to be published in a report. But we have the bridge.
Why isn't it on the screen so that the audience can see this?
Yeah, because we wrote it literally last night. But we're working through it, so let me just keep going, all right? So the bridge, Union Gospel Mission, Dallas Life, Salvation Army, and Austin Street Center. Those are the 5. So we don't have enough affordable housing, and we don't have enough permanent supportive housing stock. And so what happens is our homeless that are in the shelters get stuck in the shelters, and we can't move them out of the shelter. The average length of stay in the shelter at your place, Jay, is what, 70 days? Something like that? Too long. Some people are in shelters for over a year. Larry shared with me a situation where we had people in the shelter for multiple years because the housing's not available. And so we have this log jam in our shelters, and we have this strain on our shelter system because we can't move our homeless population that's ready for housing, that is eligible for housing, that has vouchers from the federal government for housing into housing, because we don't have a system for doing that. Let me finish it, and then I'm going to open it up for everything. I'm almost done. We have about 3,200 permit supportive housing beds right now, way too few to meet our needs. And then finally, the investment in inefficiencies and misalignment in our system. We really don't have a homeless response system that works, and I don't think ever have had one, best I can tell. So it's not like it's just suddenly broke. We've never been able to really create such a one. The overall programmatic funding is minimal. We get some level of contribution from our government, but it's very small. Local governments in relation to the funding we get from the federal government and even the state government around this problem. And so my takeaway, we got to, get system alignment, so we're all kind of using our resources against the same common set of issues and priorities and work together as a community. And then 2, we've got to get improved performance, improved accountability against that alignment, and then we've got to get more resources aligned against it as well. So I think that's a pretty bleak picture, and I hated to unpack it that way, but you have the draft of the document now in front of you, and I encourage you to read it, and if it's not accurate, please let us know. If the tone is not the right tone, please let us know, so we can moderate it down before we share it more publicly. Let's go Jim first, and then Karen.
Okay, since the last meeting, and by the way, good afternoon. Since the last meeting, we looked into a lot of costs per person, per homeless, per year, and we've looked at all these slide rules and so forth. During that time, we were able to find properties in Dallas that are owned by Dallas, DISD, different things to that effect. And I'd like to see, with the Housing Commission, if we could do a cost, if the city is to purchase one of these properties and convert it into our own housing, because I think to force people to take the property that they make income from under the concept of fair is a lot harder than controlling your own units, and the city has control of what they're spending, what they're doing, and they can locate them at 4 or 5 different places in the city, because right now the concentration of homeless shelters, I would say, would be downtown south, would probably be a fair guess. So these District 7, 8, whichever one's around it, and probably take on more of the collateral problems, because we don't have 24 hours. I agree with the gentleman. 24-hour campuses, as it were, are probably prevalent in today's world, because what do you do between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. if you have nothing to do? Obviously, idle hands, blah, blah, blah. So to me, I think we're doing a disservice to try and force a Fair Housing Act when we have the financials between, what, $40,000 to $50,000 a year per bed at the Bridge. We're talking about $40,000 to $80,000 costs to the city per person, per homeless person. I think if you take these funds and put them together and look at some of these, because there are 4 or 5 huge apartment areas that are for sale now.
Yeah.
So we buy them, then we can take them from the shelter, bring it to a housing interim, as whatever you want to label it, allow the people to stand back up, and thus these Section 8, I believe, vouchers become more valid, because you have a person who has some structure about them rather than taking someone from 0 to 100. So I think the cause of going 0 to 100 is moot.
Yeah.
I think if we don't take preliminary steps and control it, because you're asking people to do work that you and I and everyone here believes in, but I don't think, as a guy who's making money off his building, would you take someone who you believe has a structure, or would you take someone that's forced down your throat? So if you control both ends of that, you control the finance of it, and you control the process of it. And that allows you to audit what you're doing, allows you to see where you're going, because it's in 5 or 6 different spots around the city. That's just a thought.
Yeah, I think, Jim, you're going to see when we get to the recommendations and strategies, you're going to see some things that have that theme built into it. So if you just, we're going to unpack
thank
that
you.
conversation in much more depth here in the second hour of the program. Other thoughts, though, about this current state? And Karen?
My concern, again, is that it deals with the super user, but it does not address or even identify the number of children, youth, families, and domestic violence victims we have that are homeless. None of that is in here, and that, to me, is a problem.
Okay. Can you help us there? It's not
Yes.
an error that was intentionally done.
It's in the shelter report. We provided that, so we have the data.
Okay, so we...
The best we could find.
We need basically a tight, solid paragraph that bakes
Got it.
that data into it. So that's a very helpful comment. Bill?
I believe there needs to be a section, Mr. Chairman, on the politics of Dallas, political risk in Dallas. Some of the suggestions I've heard would require a city charter amendment. That's not going to happen. Two important dates have impacted, in my opinion, the city of Dallas. November 22nd and July 7th. And that's the reality we're living in right now.
So what would a political section say, Bill?
It would take a look at our existing council and our existing commission, and the mayors need to be able to find 8 votes. And when you look at the politics around the city, and Tanya, part of her presentation is based upon what council district do you come from. In some of these categories, are we asking council to take an extreme political risk to support the dollars that are being suggested this afternoon?
So let me try and figure out how that might be phrased in a way
I'm not
that...
saying it's easy.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Quickly, I just want to, firstly, I think that the tone that you are presenting is right on point. I think the realities need to be presented as they are so that people understand the stark nature of the situation. So I would say that as much as we can in our recommendations and our statements, that we continue to reiterate the fact that this homelessness problem is simply an extreme of the greater issue, which you mentioned, which is poverty. And how do you systematically deal with, poverty issues that have been created systematically? Because that's the reality of what we're dealing with. To deal with the upfront issues caused by homelessness, is one thing, but an ounce of prevention is always going to be worth that pound of cure. And if we don't deal with this upstream, then we're going to continue to be affronted with more people and more people falling into homelessness, with poverty levels where they are, rental costs rising. It's just a recipe for that disaster to increase.
That's why, and I think that's exactly right, and that's why we kind of parked that up front, just to let people know that's the backdrop for the environment we're in right now.
And I just want to say that I've had these conversations with Councilmember Arnold. That will be something that we're focused on continuing the conversation on heavily in District 4, and I'd love to engage with others around the other districts to have that conversation to create more community outreach around that subject.
Yep, it's helpful. Thank you. Ann?
I just wonder, is there a place in here for like a historical perspective on what the city has done in the last decade or so on homelessness? Just because we're going to have some of the audience for this. It's not, this is kind of like, here's where we are right now. But is there some way that we can just in a very brief way lay out, what happened in 2004, and particularly in the housing subcommittee, because we've learned about a lot of things that have been presented to the council in the past. So kind of to give the sense that
I think that's helpful.
a lot of things have been tried and not acted on, or
So as I shared with you, I think maybe at the very first meeting, there was a group just like this about a decade ago that had these exact same conversations. And then the company that Kelly works for, Corporation for Supportive Housing, issued a report, and it basically gave a roadmap to Dallas on how to kind of tackle this. And then it went nowhere, best we could tell. And so I think that,
But maybe, just to, not to make the document longer, maybe even just to link to the report, attach all the
yeah,
history.
we'll do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a good point. We need to admit our past and own our terrible mistakes. And we need to clearly not dismiss the segregated outcomes of our policy that, whether we intended or not, have been racist. I mean, the people that we moved out from under the bridges and tried to get into housing were overwhelmingly African-American men. And our policy is resulting in an outcome, I pray to God, none of us want. We have a segregated city, and we have income gap that's unbelievable. Now, I don't know if that goes in your report, Britton, but I think there should be.
It was in my report and we pulled it out just because it was really heavy.
I think this council, this Dallas City Council needs to hear that word, and they need to respond to it because they're the leaders tasked with the responsibility of the quality of life in this city. And our past, our racial past, is something we swept under the rug again and again and again and patted ourselves on the back.
This is not a decade. This goes back to the desegregation order 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, Bob, we'll unpack that. Put it back in. Let's go, Tanya and then Gary.
I just have a follow-up to David. You know, talking about political will. And you mentioned that these conversations have been had before in the past, and you flash forward and here we are today. And, you know, when talking about solutions and change, it can be extremely overwhelming, which is, I think, part of the reason why we're having this conversation again today. Political will. When we're talking about solutions, often those solutions take time, and they're long-term solutions. And if there's one area that I think both from a community engagement standpoint and from a political will standpoint that is very, very important is to look at the short, interim, and long-term solutions. You know, some of our council will be in their term for 2 years. Some may be in their term for 8. When we're talking about solutions that are 7 years or longer to be implemented, it's very, very difficult to bring them to the table. So, you know, one way that we can encourage those conversations and encourage the conversation not only with the council and also with the community is to really push hard packaging this proposal as short-term, interim, and long-term to keep that political will in place.
So when we get to the strategies, you'll see that we have identified them in a way that aligns with that kind of sense of urgency and then the longer-term studies, not to preempt the conversation, but just to get us going on it.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Bill.
This exact conversation took place 12 years ago, and it was before the city council 12 years ago when the decision was made to put construction of the bridge on a bond issue. Many of those people, none of them are on the council now, but many of them are still alive. And over in City Hall someplace, there's an old dusty file that records all of that discussion. It was close to a bloodletting just to get the item on the agenda 12 years ago. It's comparison in economic conditions. Dallas is going 90 miles a minute. This community is in great shape financially, but yet the subject that we're talking about really hasn't hit the agenda.
Yep, so can I pick up on that? Because it's, I think, where the rubber is going to hit the road here in the short run. So the city council will gather with the city manager and the mayor in the next few weeks. And they'll begin a discussion of the budget. And they'll continue the discussion of the budget. And so they're talking about the 2016-17 budget, and they'll identify council priorities. Last year, they identified code enforcement and 2 or 3 other priorities in the council list of budget priorities. The rubber will hit the road when we deliver a report and they don't consider it a priority. And so I think it's our priority to make sure that they know we think it should be their priority.
Mr. Chair, we need to find a friend. His name is David Brown, because he's going to go to the council, and if they ask for a submarine, the response from the council is going to be, how big do you need it, chief?
Yeah, so we got to stay on point, Bill. I appreciate that, though. It was helpful. Lynn McBee.
Do you have an advocacy plan for us to carry forward so that that is a priority, so that we don't get into the budget setting and it comes
We're going
off
to
of
deliver
the...
that to you next week.
Okay.
And so...
So that we're all saying the same things and delivering the same message, and, okay.
Yeah. But we need to mobilize, definitely need to mobilize.
I think it's key to be present at these relative meetings.
No question, anyone that can show up for the council meeting on August the 3rd would give us a big boost. Bring friends. Other comments before we move on? Gary.
In the draft report you've done, I think it does a good job of talking about the continuum of care and the part that it plays, and you've got a data point here of collecting voucher information from DHA. One thing I'd suggest, though, there are a lot of nonprofits that are part of the continuum of care, like the organization that I'm with and others, who have appropriated grant funds from HUD and other government agencies. The problem we're running into is that the housing market in Dallas is so overheated and so competitive that we're somewhat handcuffed by HUD guidelines that say you can pay X for a one-bedroom and Y for a two-bedroom. We can't go out there and compete in this overheated market. So what's happening is, with that kind of handcuffs that we're working with, there's going to be a lot of funds that are appropriated, but right now are available. We're not going to be able to use because we can't find the housing. The housing's not there. One of two ways of trying to approach it that could help out is if we're, I'm just going to use this as a hypothetical, I don't know that the numbers are exactly this, but if we're 10% or 15% or 20% below being able to go out into the market and compete, that could be supplemented. The city doesn't have to go and spend 100 cents on the dollar to house somebody. We've got a lot of federal funding available, but we can't reach, be competitive, supplementing it with private philanthropic dollars, the city coming to the table. But I think that piece of the story needs to be told here. If HUD would loosen up a little bit, the HUD guidelines that we're working with, I'm told, I don't know this because I don't crunch the numbers, are a couple of years behind what the market is.
Right.
So, we could go a long way. And I think in the report, since you're with Continuum of Care, you can get this information. We need to find out what other members of Continuum of Care, what funding they have that they're not going to be able to use because of the overheated housing market. We can't be competitive. That could go a long way to helping to solve this. And if there's some way we could bring political influence there on HUD to get them to allow us, I don't know whether it takes an act of Congress or some administrative activity to realize that in this overheated housing market in Dallas, we need to have some ability to be able to compete in the private market. You can't get housing that you would want to put people in at the rates that we're...
So just so everybody's clear, this is really kind of one of the sad parts of the story, that there are 1,800 vouchers that are out right now that represent almost $15 million in federal income rent subsidy that go unused. In addition to that, what Gary's talking about is dollars that have flown to his, have hit his organization's budgets that can't be unlocked either, because we don't have strategies in our community to use that money. And so it's kind of a double sad. And we've got the situation of the super utilizer that's costing us all this money on the street, and then we have a pot of money that the federal government's giving us to put against that, and we can't figure out how to do that. And so we'll talk more about that, but everyone around the table just needs to know that's very real. So other questions about the report, kind of how we're approaching it? Are we good? We're good? Okay, for Kelly?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to turn the floor over to her. now, and so I'll set it up a little bit in more depth. What Kelly can do is help us understand what other communities have done to make a big difference in this space. And if you go online and spend several hours of just trying to Google successful results of communities in homelessness or investments of communities in homelessness, all the information is there. But her organization works it all the time. And so I'm going to turn it over to her for 15 or 20 minutes to tell us about some communities that have actually made a huge difference. And then, Ricky, if you want to ask a question, you'll be up next.
Great. Thanks, Britton. Thanks so much for having me here today. As Britton said, I work for CSH. We're a national nonprofit, but we have an office in Houston that works across the state of Texas. And there are 3 of us that are there now that have been dedicated to the Houston work since we really started the big implementation and systems change work that I'm going to give you a little bit of an idea about that we did in Houston. So there have been 3 of us that have been working really hard on that for the past 3 years, and I've shifted over the past year and a half to working more statewide and looking to other communities in Texas that we can really make this impact as well. So I'm very excited to be in Dallas. Have Dallas roots. My grandmother still lives in Oak Cliff, and so, very happy to be here and having this conversation with all of you. And was thinking about, Larry, when you were saying that it's a race issue, my son came with me to work the other day, and we were walking around in my offices downtown, and he said the same thing. My son is biracial black, and he said, Mom, a lot of these homeless people are black. Why? And we had to kind of unpack that conversation. He's 7. Unpack that conversation with a 7-year-old. So, continuing to bring it up, I think, with your city council and reminding us that that's an important side of this issue is something that we, in Texas especially, are going to have to deal with. So I'm just putting that out there. You're not alone. I don't think you think you're alone. But the other part of you're not alone, telling the story of Houston is really about where we were more than where we are. In 2012, Houston was named a priority community by HUD. And there were 10 communities that were named priority communities, and it wasn't because they were so great. It was because they had some of the highest numbers of homelessness, were sending back the most money to the federal government because they weren't using it correctly. And I think Houston in particular got picked because we had one of the highest percentages of people living on the street who were homeless. So at that time, there were about 3,500 chronically homeless people living on the street. And it gave us an opportunity in Houston, and the beauty of what happened in Houston is that people said, okay, and took that opportunity. And I've heard it characterized as a yes and community. I think quite a bit of it as a why not community. We had a lot of people at the table who were in a position like you are now and saying, we've been doing a lot of work for a long time and nothing is better, and we need to do better. So let's figure out what we can do, and let's really move forward and be ambitious and do something totally different. So that's exactly what we did. Part of it was through technical assistance from HUD. There was something that we had called a charrette that really brought the whole community together to create this planning process, community planning process to end homelessness, brought together the public, providers, stakeholders, other types of stakeholders. And at that meeting, Mayor Anise Parker, who was about to enter her last race as mayor, stood up and said, I'm committed to making this as an issue for me, and I'm going to appoint someone as a mayor's special assistant to homelessness. None of us actually knew that was going to happen at that meeting, so we were all pretty surprised. But what she did then was say, okay, this is a priority for me, and instantly gave the political will and elevated the topic to something that was important, not only for the people in the room, but to the community. And her saying, I'm going to use all the political will I have to make this happen. So we were able to move forward relatively quickly with that political will behind us, and got everybody together, and instead of having a bunch of organizations that operated as siloed kind of programs, we said we need to operate as one system, and let's look at that system, let's analyze what we're doing now, let's use all the data at our disposal and start tracking what we're doing, where people are going, what we need, how much more supportive housing we need, how much more services we need, what we need to do to really make an impact on these individuals. So we had to take 3 approaches. We had to completely change the way that we accessed housing, and that meant that everybody had to give up a little bit of something, but everybody gained a whole lot as well, because it became more about the system than the individual programs. We also knew that we had to build 2,500 more units of permanent supportive housing. And we also knew that we had to redesign the way that our services addressed individuals who were living in supportive housing, so that we had the right types of robust services to really help these 3,500 people that were living on the street, because they were really sick. They'd been there for a long time, and they needed a lot of support. So we did all of those things simultaneously, and through that, really had an implementation team that was part the mayor's special assistant to homelessness, but also support for the Continuum of Care Lead Agency, which in Houston is the Coalition for the Homeless. Here it's MDHA, and really used both to elevate the issue and allowed the COC lead agency to direct the funds and do the support of the community and those programs, and allowed the kind of worker bees on the ground to help with the implementation side, using the mayor's political will to really push that forward. So, out of that charrette came a plan, but it wasn't a plan that sat on a shelf. It was all about implementation. And we had work groups and meetings. I know we all go to lots of meetings all the time. I hear that every time I come to Dallas. I'm like, oh, I just went to a meeting with that person yesterday. But that there were lots of meetings, but instead of the meetings being about meeting, the meetings were about what is the action that we're actually going to do to make this happen. And every meeting had an action step and work that the work group was doing that then became a recommendation to a COC steering committee. And so that was really one of the most important things that happened in Houston, was redesigning our governance structure to have a COC steering committee of committed stakeholders, and again, people that all had skin in the game. The representatives include our housing and community development from the city and county, both the city and county housing authorities, our local mental health authority, the VA, 2 consumer representatives, so homeless people either living in a shelter or in supportive housing. We have 2 representatives from service providers. We have the philanthropic community, we have Workforce Commission, we have Health and Human Services. So all of those people are at the table, and they're the oversight committee that when these bodies come and say, this is what we think we need to do, these are the recommendations, they're looking at the recommendations and saying, yes, this is what we do as a community. And a lot of those were around prioritizing the right types of people. So we said, we're making a commitment to what the federal government is telling us. We're going to prioritize in the order that the federal government is saying, this is what we need to prioritize, and these are the resources you have. So we prioritized veterans, and then chronically homeless, and we're working on youth and family. And part of the beauty of that is, we were able to take all of the resources that we got with veterans from VASH, SSVF, which I know I'm throwing out acronyms that you might not know, but I won't go into what each of those are, but they're the interventions that can help individuals with permanent housing. And we're really able to use that to test our coordinated entry and placement system. And we then controlled all of the housing, and every housing unit that anybody had access to was controlled centrally and is controlled centrally through our coordinated access system. So everybody knows where someone is going, and we track how long from a person is touched by someone in outreach until they get into that housing, or someone enters the shelter until they get into that housing. And we certainly did have to make some tough choices around priorities, but it wasn't that tough because the priorities that we made were the most vulnerable people that were out on our streets. So we said, we're taking the people who have the highest need first, that are the most likely to die on the streets first, and getting them housed first. And using that then to work upstream, and knowing what we know to work upstream to get everybody else into housing. So, the steering committee had staff in a lot of these work groups, and were a lot of efforts that went into making sure that, each of these work groups was able to support the work of the steering committee, but all of the steering committee was staffed by our continuum of care lead agency, who was able to make recommendations and then was able to, put this into our applications to HUD. I can tell you that since that happened, so since 2013, I believe, last year, we effectively ended veterans' homelessness. And so we were one of the first really big communities to do it. We're really proud of it. We've decreased chronic homelessness, I believe, by 57% since 2013. We have reduced family homelessness. And of course, I didn't write down, but overall reductions across the board, even as other communities are seeing it go up. And part of that has been we've really increased our level of permanent supportive housing in the community, as well as dollars committed to rapid rehousing. Another kind of shiny star for Houston is last year, when lots of people got lots of cuts from HUD, we got the best score in the whole continuum of care. So, they were paying attention to what we were doing and saying, you're doing this right. You're creating a system, and you have priorities that are based on your system needs and your community needs, and we appreciate that you understand how to make that work. So it's been really exciting to work in that, and I'm really happy to share what we did in Houston and try to support that in Dallas. But Houston isn't the only good community out there. I'm going to brag about it just because I live there and I feel like I can. And the tension between Houston and Dallas, I'm just going to play that up because I can.
We love that you're here in Dallas.
Yeah.
You Houstonite.
I'm not a Houstonite. I've only been in Houston for 8 years, but
I can tell you on that point, I think we can learn a lot from Houston.
Yeah.
And we should embrace that.
Yeah.
We should just, give them credit.
Mr. Chair, no argument, but we're comparing apples to oranges. Houston is a strong mayor form of government.
Well, so let me tell you about a couple of other cities. And I don't think you're necessarily comparing apples to oranges, because we all have the same state structure and kind of the same restrictions on resources that are available. Sure, our communities are different in the way we do development and the way that our city council governs and all of that. That is true. But that doesn't mean that you can't make similar impacts. We were able to take the dollars that we already had. We didn't get tons and tons of new investment. We just strategically aligned the investments that we already had from the city and the county and our housing authorities and made them work together. So it wasn't just that the mayor was saying this is to be done. The work that was being done in our community development departments, with our housing authority, and with our service providers on the ground. The mayor was just there to provide political support. There are other communities that have done similar things. Salt Lake City had a big initiative around Housing First and brought together all of their stakeholders to really make a commitment and all work together to align their system to end chronic homelessness and family homelessness, and they've made a lot of progress over the past 5 years. I know one of the biggest things that they've done is implement a really strong HMIS, and so their homeless management information system and all the data that goes into it they use all of that data to drive their decision making. Similarly, in Orlando, they had a really big homelessness family issue. They have 3 mayors, 2 county mayors and a city mayor, and the county mayor is stronger than the city mayor, and the city mayor stepped up and put his political will behind it. The county mayor has also supported, and also put someone in a position of power that was the point person that kind of led all of this work. They got investments from the public hospital system, and it was managed by the philanthropic community to create more permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing for their families. And so there are a lot of creative ways that you can do this. I think the biggest part of it is that it's incredibly collaborative. It's all about collective impact, and it's about using data to drive your decision making and working as a team in the community, but having someone there to really help you drive it and implement that work.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes, I think I've already.
Will, who's here from McKinsey, actually had an opportunity to visit with Denise Parker this past week. So why don't you share with the group kind of how she counseled you and us relative to moving this project forward?
Sure.
So I got an opportunity to spend just over an hour with Anise last week, and I guess you could call it an interview, where I got to pick her brain a little bit on how she felt about Houston's success and corroborate many of the things Kelly already brought up. But I think if I synthesize the three main recommendations that she had, understanding that our city is structured very differently than hers, and realizing that her political will alone was a big driving force for the change that they were able to make. Her three pieces of advice to Dallas were really, one, that we need a holistic plan, but as many people have said, we also need to take action and start to see results in order to create momentum. And Houston was able to do that through its focus on veterans. The very first action that Houston took and started implementing was to house 100 homeless veterans in the first 100 days. And the success of that program and the momentum that created really provided a support base for the rest of the actions that they had laid out in their plan. So I think one recommendation was certainly to have a plan, but think very carefully about the first and immediate steps that we can make to have impact. The second is another point already brought up today by some of our speakers and many other commissioners. I think is something that is in our report, but around really having one person who's accountable and has authority to help manage all of the different agencies and different representatives who come to the table here. And that person has real authority to set an agenda and to create alignment amongst those agencies. You've got to have, I think Kelly said, everybody gives up a little but gains a lot. And so we need to have alignment and one person that creates that alignment. In Houston, because of the strong mayor system, Anise was able to personally play a little bit of that role. Here in Dallas, I think we have to approach it obviously differently, but I think it's an important part of how we think about the solution. And then her third was that, again, I think another part that's already been brought up again today, but I'll reinforce it given she brought it up, was about utilizing all of the underutilized assets that are already out there. Whether it's VASH dollars or existing federal grants or other homeless vouchers, we can, if we can create alignment using and get everybody pointed in the same direction, the amount of existing resource that we can then count on and build against can really create even faster momentum and give the community a sense of accomplishment. And I think that's a big thing that Houston's seen that's enabled them to continue to make progress over several years. So those were maybe the three biggest pieces of advice for Anise. It was a great conversation. I'm happy to answer any questions if people have them. But
yeah, the other part of that, it certainly, it would have happened anyway, but with Mayor Parker's leadership and kind of push and political will, it happened so much faster than we imagined it would have. So we had all the right pieces in place, and we would have, continued to implement. That we all believe that, but this made it happen at lightning speed, essentially.
I have a question. First of all, being from District 7, obviously it's a predominantly black neighborhood. I heard a couple comments about race and so on and so forth. And statistically, in the homeless shelters, it's about 40% white, doing that 76% of the population is white. It's 40% black, doing the population is 11% black. It's about 11% Hispanic and about 8% American Indian, which there's about 9% Hispanics and 1% American Indians. Now, I think we do an injustice when we bring out the fact that a comment to me, in a setting like this, a comment that there's a lot of African Americans underneath the bridge is a true statement, but it's a blanket statement, and I think those are toxic to the situation because I agree with the gentleman over here, it's a poverty situation, and because our areas are impoverished, being 7 or being these other areas are more impoverished, this is an indication that the poverty and any type that you want to talk about the effects of the homeless is the impoverished people of the neighborhood. Now, if we were to go to a district that was predominantly white, I would say it's safe to bet that underneath said bridge, it would be predominantly white. So I think if we're going to stick out statistics like this, I think we should back them with solid numbers. because it's a blanket statement to say this and that, and then what we do is a disservice to the race, whatever race it is, by not noting that, look, the unemployment rate in this, these are the things that are statistically, which I agree with him 100%, are the causes of the problem. All we do is blanket statement it, and I think that that's damaging to everyone, because it's easy to say, oh, this happened, so this is why. No, let's look at it statistically. Let's look realistically. Salt Lake City, that's a wonderful story if you read the top paragraph, but if you read down the story, it's not quite as effective as it appears to be in the first paragraph of the story. Houston has great marks, but and I agree, you guys have done a great job down there looking into it, but you had a perfect storm. You had people that wanted to cooperate. What I can see in this report here, I don't see anything about communication in here. I don't see anything about HUD working with DIS, as we talked about before. So I would ask of the commission to back our statements up with numbers. I just gave you solid percentage numbers on what the statistics are of homeless, but yet we never mentioned that in our conversation. Of the city of the AKA 12 to 14,000 homeless that we haven't broke down how many are chronic, how many are families, how many are on the verge, because I think right now we're using people that are on the verge of homeless as a homeless number as well. So I think we're doing a disservice to everyone at the table if we're not coming across with facts to back our statements. It's very troubling for me, because I can go and research this stuff, and I just sat here, I showed the gentleman next to me, I pulled those statistics up like that. Why are we not including them in what we're talking about? Because I think intelligent people can look beyond the statement that you're giving them.
Okay, so do you have statistics on how many of the 12,000 fall into each category?
I don't.
The reason why is because we don't have an HMIS data system to do it. And so you're asking for statistics that aren't available because as a community, we've never been able to figure out how to create a data system to produce this.
Well, wouldn't that be in the priorities?
It's going to be there.
It's got to be in the priorities.
Strategies and recommendations are coming. Ricky.
Sir, what's the source of what you just said? What's the source of those numbers?
The homeless, it's a nonprofit homeless, let me give it to you right now.
Is it Dallas?
No. No, it's nationwide. I mean, but I'm just giving you an example that
I just want to respond a little bit.
I'd like to say something about these statistics. These statistics are awesome. I mean, you got 99% of veterans got housed between 2011 and 2016. 70% of chronically homeless were housed. And then the money, $1 million for 1,000 units. These statistics are unbelievable. And what I'm hearing a lot of is it started with the mayor. And it started with putting everybody together. One of the problems, because I was with the Metro Dallas Homeless Lines in 2003, and the whole point of it being formed was to get everybody to work together. And that really hasn't happened. And the system is fragmented. Everybody's kind of working, doing their own thing. And so you stand in line for a long time, and they say you don't qualify. And so what you should say is you do qualify, just not here with this agency, so that everybody is working together. And the HMIS system is going to accomplish that. But we got to get everybody together. And my question is, how do you get the mayor on board, and how do you get everybody to start working together with the HMIS system?
That's the right question.
Yeah, and you know, Houston was in the exact same place. I mean, I can't stress that enough. It wasn't like we were all, I worked for the county at the time, and we weren't all sitting around holding hands and singing Kumbaya. It was not going that way at all. But I think people were frustrated with spending so much money and seeing no improvement, and stopped saying we can't, and started saying, why not? Let's try.
Let me just respond a little bit. Jim, one thing I will say is that there is a level where we agree. I think the statistics are important where you have them to utilize, to properly identify and be able to be data-driven in decision-making. I do think as well, though, that we have to have the strength of will to call a spade when we see a spade. To identify not just the current situation, but the long-term realities that created it. Because if we don't, we will not be able to permanently rectify the situation. I agree. We will continue to perpetuate the underlying problems that ultimately create the same emergence.
I agree.
So, I think that, I commend Larry on what he said, because those of us who know and have a history of understanding in Dallas know that that's a simple reality here. The issue is, knowing that and knowing the statistics, and knowing that, being poor, there are other realities that present that situation. Ultimately, I think that, what we have to understand is this is an opportunity we have to address all of the real underlying issues. But we have to understand we must deal with the foundation of the problem to create a foundation for a solution.
I agree.
And that we have the opportunity to not just deal with a homelessness problem, but to grow the progress of the city as a whole in dealing with the problem is an opportunity.
I agree.
It's an opportunity.
Well,
and so we have to take that charge to deal with it plainly, and we can't ignore any of the aspects that have created.
But when you dig into the data, over 2/3 of the poor in Dallas are people of color.
Yes.
I agree.
So we don't do ourselves any favors by thinking we move past a racial index. We have not. And we make decisions in this city about how we spend money and where we spend it based on geography and ethnicity.
There's a reason why there are so many communities of color that lack infrastructure, for example, that prevent the ability to develop. Just as an example, I don't want to get too off topic, Chair. I think we should move on to
You've
the
got a little more
solutions that we have
latitude,
created,
but then
just-
we're going
I
to
just
move
want
to
to
Karen next and then Lynn next.
So my question is specifically about your report. And I've followed some of Houston, but there's something that was said that made me go, there's an issue here. So if we say there's 5 main shelters in Dallas, and the bulk of those beds come from private shelters that are not accepting COC funds, and then this gentleman talked about having the authority to implement an alignment plan. Well, that authority really comes from somebody accepting those funds and agreeing to play a certain way. And my question is how you can really compare Houston, where I think almost everybody was taking COC funds. No?
Nope. So our 3 large shelters, especially our largest shelter, which is Star of Hope, did get some COC funds for supportive housing, but their shelter dollars were not tied to COC. And most of our other most of the other shelters that provided, overnight services to individuals did not get COC funds to do that. They were philanthropically funded almost exclusively, or from individuals or churches or something like that.
So how did you find the authority to make that happen?
Well, I didn't, but I think Anise would say, and I'll try not to speak for her, but I think she did say that very little of this authority was actual real oversight authority with these organizations. There was some political authority, but also it was a joint agreement of everybody that we're going to work together to create a better common good. And so it was each organization standing up and saying, we need a leader. If you appoint a leader, we will all come together and align to that one objective. And so I don't think it was an actual ability to enforce one objective, but it was agreement that was the best way to create progress.
And that didn't happen overnight.
So I'm just going to tell you, I'm on the Shelter and Services Committee. I'm not part of a shelter right now, and I just want to tell you that this committee has worked together beautifully, private, public, in a cooperation I have never seen before in the 13 years I've been involved in this deal.
Yeah, and that's certainly what well, and just another thing, Kara, one of the other things that happened is, as we were doing all of this, the private funders were at the table too, and they started, initially they were saying, COC, you're not doing anything, so why should we follow what HUD tells us to do? We're going to do what we continue to do, because this is what works for us. As we brought them along, and as we started showing that we were making some real impact, they started saying to applicants coming to them, how are you aligning with the COC? Tell us what you're doing. So it happened over time. So,
Okay, we're going to kind of be crisp and move the agenda, but this has been a great conversation. I'm going to go to Lynn McBee and
Actually,
Dan, and
this
then
answered my
maybe
question, what you
one
just
more.
covered.
I just answered your question.
Yeah, a question I was asked that was along the same vein of what you just addressed.
Okay, great. Ann?
Could you just briefly address, we're talking a lot about political will and how you create that political will. We don't have the strong mayor system, but we want to learn everything we can from how you got where you got in Houston. What role did the crisis of Hurricane Katrina and being designated by HUD as one of the worst cities in the country, what role did that play in creating political will? Did that happen before or after, or what was
That happened before. So the Katrina, I think what Katrina helped with, especially with our philanthropic partners, is they got used to working together to fund things quickly, and some of the emergency response, same thing. But it didn't really shift the way that we provided, services to homeless individuals. And then the designation as a priority community, the great thing about that is our community and our COC took that and said, yay! So they're like, we're gonna do this and move forward.
So given that we don't have those kinds, we have a crisis, but we don't have that kind of crisis. That we
Right,
can
but
go to
you're
our
in
city
the-
council and say.
yeah.
We're in the fourth quartile.
No, I know, but I'm
Just so
asking
you
you
know,
for
we're
your
not good.
Yeah, I mean-
thoughts on how we create that kind of urgency.
Right. I think this commission being created creates that urgency. I think you have the political will behind you right now saying we've got to do something different, and you have all these people at the table saying we've got to do something different, that it's there. So you're at that point. It's just now, instead of talking about it, taking it into action.
Final word on this, and then we're going to move, Gary.
Now, mine's going to be real short, just a quick question. I'm very impressed, and I think most people here are very impressed hearing about what Houston did. Has CSH published, is it available on a website or something, if we wanted to go and learn more about what was done and how it was done? Is that?
There's a link to it on our website.
Is it?
You go to our website, it's called The Way Home, I think it's probably the starting point.
Yeah, we did it through our continuum of care. I mean, CSH was a part of it. One of my colleagues was in the mayor's office, so she was the one who did that. Another colleague and I were inside the COC lead agency, so we really infused capacity in that way. But we are just partners and conveners. What we did, the community did it, so it's all held through our continuum of care, and that story is, it's The Way Home is the continuum of care through Harrison County.
Roadmap is out
Yeah,
there.
Yep,
so I'm
it's
going to
out
wrap it up on that note and just say that I didn't realize it, but once I got kind of immersed in it, I did see that other cities around the country of same size and scale as ours have made tremendous progress against their homeless issue. So it's not a lost cause, and there's a lot to learn from others that we'll continue to kind of put into our thinking. So let's go ahead and move. We're behind schedule, I want to suggest. So let's be focused in our approach going forward. So we've had all of our subcommittees up and going, and it's time to bring all of that input together and everyone to get a chance to know what everyone else has been working on. This again was designed for last time when we weren't together, so we're going to have to be particularly focused. So we're going to start, Tanya, with your group. And so I think you have a PowerPoint presentation, and it's teed up. So the floor is yours.
My name is Tanya Reagan, and I was chair of the Community Engagement Subcommittee. First, I'd like to recognize the subcommittee members: Krista Nightingale, Bill Vandervoort, Steve Davies, Michael Pozekvis, and David Gruber. These guys have really put in a tremendous amount of work. The last 6 weeks has been incredibly intense and very, very fast-paced, coordinating over 60 schedules, 6 locations, and 6 community public meetings. So it has been pretty intense, but I think we've really accomplished a lot in a short amount of time, and we are really excited to share that with you today. Over the last 6 weeks, the 6 community public meetings covered 6 topics, and those topics were sheltering the homeless, homeless in East Dallas, mental health and homelessness, those experiencing homelessness, homeless youth, and housing and homelessness. The highest attendance was for the mental health and homelessness, where we had 170 attendees. The purpose of these meetings was to engage and gather feedback from the community about their experiences, challenges, and their solutions for Dallas homelessness. We had over 550 people attend these 6 meetings, and that included representation from all 14 council districts, including our outlining cities. The structure of the meetings included 4 expert panelists on the topic, and the moderators were local news journalists, reporters, and columnists that had already written on the topic. We had 45-minute panel discussions and 45 minutes dedicated to questions and recommendations. Something that I am extremely proud about is that the audience and the attendees took the topics very, very seriously. People were extremely respectful. They came with very good questions, and they were there to participate in the conversation. All of our meetings were live streamed and placed on the City Hall website for anyone who was unable to attend. We had work boards at all of the public meetings that encouraged the participants to share their challenges, solutions, and recommendations. We had overhead slides and handouts at all the meetings that included the Twitter handles for our panelists and our moderators for each discussion. And we asked the audience to tweet and share the conversation, share the discussion, using the hashtags Dallas Homelessness and hashtag Solutions. So if you are on Twitter or on Facebook, you can look up those hashtags and see history on the conversation. Each public meeting had a different topic, and the purpose of that was to attract different participants. Often in the past, as we've had meetings on homelessness and we have the discussion about homelessness, it can become incredibly overwhelming. By making the public meetings very, very specific on topic, it allowed us to really drill down on the conversation, get a lot more in depth, and really help educate the public on that particular topic. The Solutions for Dallas Homeless Facebook page reached 451 followers and had over 5,500 people in 1 week visit the site. We also had a Twitter page, which allowed us to communicate with organizations from all over the country about Dallas homelessness. We had a community public survey. That survey had 370 responses with over 700 comments. Now today, Michael P. will be walking through the top-level results of our community engagement. We do have a third-party firm, the Dallas Marketing Group, that is in the process of analyzing all of our public meeting data. When we meet next week, all of that analysis will be completed, and we will be able to share very detailed information with you. However, today we thought it was really important to share with you just a top-level recap from these community meetings. We also have a tremendous amount of comments. We will be sending those comments out to you all today after this meeting. Certainly, the different committees have very specific responsibilities. So as you read through the 700-plus comments, you'll be able to identify what falls within your committee or what is important for your committee. But meanwhile, today, we'll walk through the top level. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael Pozekwas to walk through the PowerPoint that you see above.
Thanks, Tanya. Well, she mentioned that we had the community public engagement meetings, and of the 550 people that did attend these meetings, I really want to point out the diverse crowd that was there. You had politicians, you had citizens, you had representatives from different agencies. Homeless people came to every single meeting, and it was, again, a very diverse crowd and a very, very interested crowd. And that was slightly surprising to us. Initially, we thought we would get input from the downtown core, where the services are concentrated, but it actually did come from all over the city. And again, the topics kept people's interest. It wasn't the same meeting every single time, even though the formats of the meetings were the same. And we do need to thank the panelists. They were great. They took their time out on a very short-term notice. And every meeting, again, was different. They were lively. Some were livelier than others, but they were good discussions. Gathering the input, and again, we did this just so people can start the discussion even before the meetings. There were some questions out there, and there were just 1, 2, 3-word answers. And again, we're going to provide you some of those, and we're categorizing them in just very simple things. Need affordable housing, need more shelters, need more this. The community surveys, as Tanya mentioned, we had 370 responses. A little bit more right now because people are still responding as we speak. And the 700 comments. The comments are free form, so it is going to take a little bit of time to categorize them and analyze that information. Bill has already started doing some of it, and we're getting some pretty interesting results. But it is a very, very long task there. Now, we asked people what council district they lived in. And what we wanted to do was to judge the interest in the topic outside the city core. And we found out that there was a level of interest in every single council district we went to. There was a lot of interest from people outside the city limits also. Almost a third of the people came from outside the city. A lot of them worked downtown, drove in from the suburbs, and again, they were interested enough to attend these meetings and give their input. Now, the challenges, one of the questions we asked, what do you feel is the biggest challenge in your community in regards to homelessness? And we're not asking for the causes here. We're just asking what the people's perceptions are of the challenge. And again, kind of surprised us was the number one challenge was mental health. And, we were anticipating lack of housing, lack of shelter, but this is the number one thing that people felt were the challenge in their communities. Lack of housing, lack of shelter were running second and third. Now, we asked people what was the effect of homelessness in their community. And like we said, this is spread all around the city, but the number one answer is quality of life issues. And we all know what that is. We've all heard the complaints, public intoxication, nudity, sleeping on the streets, and that type of stuff. And one of the reasons, and this is not a surprise to anybody, but one of the reasons we think it's important is because this can represent a very short-term win when we're talking about short-term things. This is people's perception, and people took a lot of time to come to meetings and contribute, and I think if we deal with this type of issue, it can be, again, low-hanging fruit and an easy win, and it shows that the city and the governments are kind of committed to, listening to their concerns. Now, we asked people, gave them some suggestions on what solutions would they recommend. What do they feel would be the easiest way, the best way, or maybe not even the best, but what they feel is the most effective way. And the number one answer is housing first, spread across the city, with wraparound services. And been a lot of talk about that, and I think that in this case, you're garnering public support for something that is going to cost a lot of money. It is going to cost a lot of time, and it's going to be a lot of effort, and everybody's going to have to make a sacrifice. And it shows that people are willing to make the sacrifice as long as it's shared equally around the city. And the second suggestion was a structured encampment. There's been a lot of talk of tent cities, people who don't want to move into homes or shelters, and that might be an option for that population. A structured encampment with a transition to housing, and to move into the housing first. Tanya mentioned the different engagements that we had. Again, websites, Facebook pages, Twitter. Our social media presence has been very, very strong. We get 5,500 hits a week on the Solutions webpage. And again, these are concerned people. They're doing some research. They're looking at articles. They're comparing cities. And starting some very, very intelligent conversations. We're probably going to keep that one up forever because, again, it really is some really good information out there. And it's coming from all over the country. It started very small here in Dallas, and it really has blossomed to different cities, other cities giving us suggestions. Since we've started this in June, we've been getting a lot of news coverage, WFAA, KERA, Channel 33, NBC, and this is just a sample of some of the articles that have been out there recently. Again, showing the community concern with this topic, and again, the willingness to do something about it is becoming a big issue. People are getting a lot more educated thanks to these forums. And based on what we found, we think that the community would support, these priorities. And one of them, and I'm going to read out loud, is we cannot accept the current level of homelessness in Dallas. All North Texans, nonprofits, city and county government, businesses, community members must coordinate to address homelessness as a community. To effectively address homelessness, we must make it a civic priority, and we must establish a centralized system of accountability to ensure that our work advances, that organizations align, and that we spend our resources wisely. And acknowledging that there is not one solution to end homelessness, we must continually analyze an array of strategies and review and implement them based on the needs of our community and, most importantly, our homeless neighbors. And I want to thank Britton for allowing us to shamelessly plagiarize something he wrote to us the other day. But the findings, and when you get the comments in the mail, like we said, there's 700 comments, you'll actually see people are supporting all of these concepts.
Can we stop on that for a second?
Sure.
Because I want to make sure we're checked off on this. We have to start somewhere in terms of a basic agreement among the commission. Can we agree on these 5 things? And I think that I asked Michael and Tanya whether they were reflective of the community engagement that they had, and they said that they absolutely were. So are these 5 things that anyone has a problem with, or we want to talk about some more?
Mr. Chair, they are reflective, but when you start digging through the comments, when we did not give them, rank from 1 to 5 or 6, some of those comments are very insightful. I guess the one that caught my attention the most is, and it's not in this, is the number of people that realized that some kind of accountability for performance is important. They may use 100 different words to get there, but they are really looking for accountability before they're going to be willing to spend much money. Tanya, you have a reaction to that?
We're almost there.
Okay.
She's about to react.
We have some clairvoyant members of the committee that are able just to kind of see into the future of the presentation. I love that.
It was amazing during our meetings. We continually interrupted each other because we could just carry on the sentences they were going to say.
Okay, back to
and what's next is, the commission's full presentation to City Council next week. We're going to continue our engagements via social media. I think they're very, very productive. And however this evolves, I think keeping the community on an ongoing conversation is important. And we are going to do a few additional forums. There are some gaps, because we only did have 8 weeks, that we'd like to bring up, such as the data compilation. There is a lot of talent downtown. There's a lot of talent in the city, and I think we can, use that resource to get this set up. We'd like to involve the community in the follow-up on the plan details so they know that their concerns have been listened to, and if not necessarily addressed, at least it can be explained to them why they can't do it at this point, whether it's a long-term, short-term, or intermediate. And then, again, another forum with the finalized planning, how we're going forward on this. And with that, I will turn it back to Tanya.
The community engagement has been extremely important. For one, we're changing the stigma with the topic of homelessness. The challenge sometimes with these community meetings is, and with the whole social media and the strong public interaction, is that the citizens in the community can be pretty critical. Also, it can be quite revealing. And I think it's really important to listen to that criticism. And I wanted to share with you just a few points in conclusion, because I think it's really, really important to hear some of this feedback. There is and has been a lack of trust from the public with those making decisions about homelessness, and that's a reality. The citizens question whether the agencies involved are capable of change and whether they are listening. For example, the commission that we have here, we have 15 appointed commissioners from districts, and we have 39 people. That's a lot. And, the citizens see several people around the table that have been part of the conversation for a long time, and they're part of the agencies, and they are hesitant. And that's based on the past. That's certainly not what we need to continue for the future, but that is the criticism. Across the board metrics, this sort of follows up with Bill, with accountability and performance, that we need all of the organizations to comply. And if we are doing performance metrics and audits, that these are made public, that we are very, very transparent, and that we have metrics that show transparency, and that we can establish short, interim, and long-term goals with regular updates and performance tracking. We want to keep this conversation going. We don't want this to end August 2nd. And in order to keep the community engaged and keep these kind of discussions, we need to really be transparent with them.
Tanya, on that note, while you're talking about transparency, on your 5 notes up there, why wouldn't transparency be the 6th? Because I think, and I've heard the same thing from our side.
Well, let me finish, and then we will open it up. An ongoing and permanent commission. The criticism has been, okay, this commission's been formed, it's going to last until X date, and then it's going to go away, and we're going to be back at the same place. I think we need to establish up front that this is going to be ongoing. And not only is it ongoing, but it is going to be recognized as a formal commission by City Hall. Some of the criticism from the public has been, well, it's not a real commission. Well, it's only short term. Well, you don't meet at City Hall. Well, even some of the city council members and public have commented that the commission isn't really real. In order for this to be taken seriously, the homeless commissioners need to be formalized. This needs to be a formalized commission. Also, we need to find solutions city and county-wide with the effort, the responsibility, and the accountability, city, council, and county-wide. The attendance. Out of the 6 community public meetings, we had 3 city council members attend. Adam McGoo, Mark Clayton, and Adam Madrano. Now, I can't speak for all of you sitting around this table, but I can tell you for the attendees, that was incredibly disappointing. We need the city council members at these meetings listening to the feedback. You can see from the overhead, every single district was represented. We need the city council to have the political will to participate in this conversation. The reason why District 2 attendance was so high on that graph, it was the #1 representation of attendance, was because Council Member Adam Madrano attended 4 out of 6 of these public meetings. His citizens are engaged and they're participating because they see their city council leader participating in the conversation. We need to keep these community discussions ongoing. It cannot end August 2nd. What was previously a taboo topic, citizens have become more comfortable talking about homelessness. We need the public to share ownership with our homeless solutions because we need to gain the public's trust that we will show them short-term wins that we will address today. We need a short-term plan, 0 to 6 months. What can be done today? We need an interim plan. What can be done in the next 2 years? And then we need a long-term plan with 3 years and longer. If we do not go to City Council with that as a packaged plan, you will lose the engagement and you will lose the participation with the citizens. We need to drill down with future topics. The public meetings should not end. These need to continue. We would like to have more public meetings in the future with new topics. For example, LGBT, religion. There can be a lot of conversations that can happen even outside the commission to keep the discussion going. We need to encourage our local media to take an investigative role in solutions journalism and help us educate. Stop reporting simply on the problems. Investigate and report on the solutions. Help us move the conversation forward. And finally, in mid-August, we will be having a community public meeting at the downtown library to share with the community the results from these 6 public meetings. This community public meeting will include the chairs from all the subcommittees on the panel to discuss their experiences and feedback from the past 6 weeks. By sharing their findings and their recommendations with the public for questions and comment, we will begin to build trust with the citizens and show transparency as we move forward with the discussion on Dallas homelessness. That is our recap.
May I interrupt you? We have one more community meeting scheduled. And we're going to tell you about it now because we are taking a pretty sizable risk. It's going to be on August 1st, and it's being hosted by 3 council members. We are not going to be hosting it. But the topic is the responsibility of the faith-based community to the homeless challenge. We have no idea where it's going, but we've discussed it amongst ourselves and we're willing to take that risk.
Okay.
We don't want anybody to be surprised, but we have opened that door.
Yeah, I got the notice yesterday.
Okay, good.
Yeah, that is not a Dallas Commission meeting, I might add.
Well, we're hot on the topic, so
Well,
we'll be
it's
ready.
3 council people that have bought in.
Yeah, I saw that. That's really terrific. Okay, so that was a great report, and there's not a whole lot there to debate, I don't think. I think you said it really, really well. But we're crunched on time, and so we're going to have to unpack these recommendations and be extremely focused in the way we do it, and then we're going to have to align them against some strategies. So let's get right into it. We're going to start with you, Blake. Talk about your group and on behalf of Ron Stretcher, and then tell us what you came up with.
To follow this, I'm not quite sure I'm ready for that. The PowerPoint, it was quite engaging. It was a great presentation. So presenting the Homeless Prevention and Discharge Planning Subcommittee report.
The materials are in front of you here, by the way, so please
But
dig them
this
out.
isn't our final report. It was it wasn't the one we emailed yesterday. So there are some additional recommendations
Okay.
that aren't included in this. So I'm going to go off of the version that we finalized yesterday morning. But we took the approach of bringing in as many service providers and other subject matter experts in the community as possible so that we could learn from them and their experience. And we came up with some similar experiences, frustrations around data collection and the lack of data to help us make informed decisions. What we also recognize, though, is that there are some amazing agencies in Dallas that are doing some incredible work, and that as a community, we are widely under-resourced. We also established that we need to develop our local strategy for addressing homelessness and not let HUD be the driving force behind that. It is an important funder, and we definitely need that part of the solution, but it shouldn't be the solution. Last but not least, just overarching principles is that none of these recommendations that we have put forth will have any impact without access to more affordable housing and supportive services. So with that being said...
Can I interrupt you quickly, just so for purposes of reporting out? I think Tanya's suggestion of breaking your recommendations out into things that can move on an immediate timeline and things that should be studied more, or we should take a little more care. That's a very helpful approach for us as we prioritize for the coming weeks. So if you think about that in advance of your report, that would be helpful.
Yep, you got it. Okay, I'll do my best to do that through this. Okay, so our first objective is related to discharge planning, which we found that homeless prevention and discharge planning are very interwoven. But our objective is to reduce the number of individuals that are discharged into homelessness from various custodial care facilities such as correctional hospitals, residential behavioral health treatment facilities. And our recommendation, we've got 3 of them attached to this objective. The first one is that we recognized through some of our research and reaching out to other organizations is that there are not system-wide protocols for identifying housing stability and homelessness at intake into these institutions and therefore at discharge. And we need to recognize that if you're in one of these institutional, and whether it's hospital, behavioral health, or correctional, that your housing is likely at risk. And so what are we doing to assess that at intake and then address at discharge? So with that, we are suggesting that we develop these system-wide protocols and processes to ensure that those screening tools are in place. This is a long-term recommendation because it will require system change. It'll also require funding because we think that you're going to need dedicated staff who solely work on homeless discharges and housing stability discharges. There's a lot more in there about lead agency and collaborative agencies and best practices, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to kind of keep running through.
And
Okay.
again, if you have a long-term recommendation, we're buying another 90 days of analysis time.
Right.
So just know you're not done with it.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. So our next recommendation, and again, falls right in line with effective discharge planning, is we have to have options to discharge individuals into when they're not able or ready to jump right into permanent housing, which is medical respite. And this will be for persons needing short-term medical or behavioral health support upon release from these treatment facilities. And there is a short-term option here because the Bridge facility was designed with 14 medical respite beds. We just need access to nursing and wraparound care, and we can immediately begin providing that service here. Long-term, we need more than 14 beds, so we need to identify the facilities and
That's very helpful.
organizations to be able to provide that service.
Does everyone understand the concept of respite beds? I'll break it down for you really briefly. So people are being discharged out of our medical facilities after day surgery or after some sort of medical event into homelessness. And there's no place for them to be discharged where they can receive some follow-up care to kind of get themselves back together. So that's the concept.
Yes. And there are some great models, actually even here in Texas locally, that are doing some innovative approaches. This one organization in Austin is leasing beds at a nursing home to provide their medical respite. So there are some innovative solutions that we can look to address this need. Our third recommendation under this objective is related solely to offender reentry, discharging from correctional institutions. And we recognize that access to income and housing are 2 key indicators for recidivism. And if you don't have identification, you can't easily obtain income or housing. And the Florida Department of Corrections is one area where they have successfully implemented a model through collaborations with the Department of Motor Vehicles and Social Security Administration to ensure that inmates prior to release have their ID in hand, and also help them apply for Social Security benefits if they are disabled. And so we think that, along with access to appropriate resource referral upon release, will greatly reduce recidivism and impact people's ability to more quickly transition into society with income and housing. This is a long-term goal because it will involve the state of Texas criminal justice system, and it's going to take a minute to get that all working together. So that's definitely long-term. Okay. Objective number 2 has to do with eviction prevention. And so our objective is to strengthen community efforts to prevent homelessness with a focus on eviction prevention, increasing workforce development skills and financial literacy skills for individuals at risk of homelessness. Ideally, if we could prevent homelessness, we'd all be out of a job, which would be great. And so we really need to have a much more concentrated effort in this area. There are a lot of organizations that are doing workforce development and financial literacy in our community, and it's wonderful work, but they all said the same thing. We have no access to dollars to help these families from actually becoming homeless when they're in this financial crisis. So we need significant investment in this area. So our recommendation is to increase investment in eviction prevention and rapid rehousing funding and improved coordination of these financial resources with the organizations providing that support. Because it's that workforce development and financial literacy that's going to help lift them out of the poverty and address some of these root causes that we've been talking about. I believe in the short term we said that we can maybe have some investment from the local churches. I think Bill was talking about bringing in the faith-based community. So we think that there's an opportunity in the short term to garnish some support for investment in eviction prevention funding. In the long term, we need to look at bigger dollars from ESG, Emergency Solutions Grant, SSVF, the Veterans Funding, and additional local investment to sustain. Last but not least, our final recommendation surrounding eviction prevention has to do with engagement in our local schools. So just to give you an idea, a small community in Oregon has identified 740 homeless children. They have 4 homeless liaisons and 4 centers that specifically work with homeless children. We have identified over 3,000 homeless children. We have 1 homeless liaison. So we really need to increase our investment in DISD to more efficiently and quickly identify and link homeless children and families to supports and housing to help address this issue. In the short term, we have identified that the DISD counselors and/or registrars could receive training by our homeless liaison, who, by the way, is amazing, so don't want to discount that by any stretch of the imagination, helping them identify which students are experiencing homelessness, and then they can also receive training on community resources such as housing, workforce development, etc. But in the long term, we need to invest in hiring additional homeless liaisons and having centers within schools for these families to receive that care. So that concludes our report.
That's an outstanding report. Very clear and crisp, and on time. So let's talk about any recommendations that she shared that is in your pack that people have questions about. People really wonder whether that's a thoughtful way to approach it. It's time now to engage. Ricky.
I understood that the Salvation Army already has a section for medical overflow. I've been there a while, so I don't know if I'm
Yeah, Ricky, so we do have beds that we hold for Parkland Hospital, but they're not true medical respite beds because we don't have nursing staff on site, but we are a resource for Parkland and Baylor when they're needing, because again, they don't want to discharge into homelessness either, so anyway, yeah.
Susan?
Well, I think that if you look around the country, there are models where at the very, and it's not one I would advocate for, but at one level, it's a shelter, and you have people in those beds, and there is no medical care on site at all, and it may be provided, people get transportation to a clinic or something like that, all the way up to a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, almost skilled nursing facility. And so there's a range. The thing that I would say about your recommendation is that in general, like when you look at the respite care provider network, they're talking about medical respite, and so that I would clearly make a line between medical respite and mental health respite.
Okay. Helpful.
I just had a question. Talking about a short-term solution. What does it cost, and do you know what it costs to add an additional support liaison for the students? You said there's one right now. You compared the four. What would that cost?
That's a good question, and I'm playing phone tag with Mark Pierce to get that information, so I'm hoping for our next meeting on Tuesday to have some more concrete data regarding that cost for you.
I just said one thing about that is that currently he's not funded by the ISD funds.
Right.
He's receiving federal funds for that. But I think that, the increase in training of existing staff, right, he currently provides training, it's just very limited. I think he does a training session twice a year at most.
Right.
And most registrars and counselors who are the people on the ground that are there to be able to identify homeless families when they register for that school, or when their child has some issue or trouble that might make the counselor aware. I would refer to her. So they can simply increase the training that he already does, the regularity and frequency of it. And I think that would go a long way towards not only identifying the other homeless families that are out there that are not counted in that 3,600 number, but in directing all of those families towards better care relative to their condition. The other thing I would add to that we may not discuss, the subcommittee discussed, was that they do have drop-in centers right now, but there needs to be an increase of those drop-in centers, so that at least have a drop-in center, preferably at least in every high school, because somebody who's struggling with homelessness is not going to be able to travel. But those drop-in centers allow for voluntary participation on the part of the parents. It's non-invasive, but it allows us as a community to present the options that are there, whether it's job training, whether it's utility assistance, whether it's housing, by placing the proper representatives in those drop-in centers, that communication can really take place.
Because talking, again, short-term, that could be something that could be done very, very quickly to see a short-term win. And, something that was interesting from our homeless youth discussion was that, the homeless youth today are the chronic homeless of tomorrow. That we have this window of opportunity while some of these young people between the age of 18 and 24, that if we can dedicate some resources and find them short-term, it could have an incredible long-term savings. So that's why I had that question about specifically the cost.
Does that include foster care? Kids that are in a foster home and then they're released when they're 18 years old and they've got no skills to handle this cruel world, and they was abused. What about?
So we did spend some time, we actually had the director of TRAC, City Squares Transitional Aged Youth Program, attend one of our meetings, and we had a pretty robust dialogue about their needs, and did identify that what was significantly lacking was shelter services for this population. And so we kicked that recommendation to the shelter committee for their discussion and inclusion. So.
Blake, do you have a cost or an ideal cost what per respite bed per homeless shelter would run? I mean, is there a blanket number?
So again, the majority of the stuff related to cost is stuff that the committee is still gathering, and we hope to have all of that for the Tuesday meeting.
Yeah, because in line with Tanya's presentation, standardizing these shelters that are receiving federal funds or some type of trickle-down fund from the federal government or county, city, however you want to state it, mandatory or a blanket type rule system saying you have 4 respite beds available at all time. I think that that's a great angle because you're on the same playing field with everyone, because some of these shelters have different rules, if you can come in, when you can come in, and things to that effect. And I think by making more of a mandated base, because you're receiving funds from the government or whatever, I think is a really interesting angle to take, because as the government gives funds to individuals, we should have some type of say, look, you have 4 respite beds, you have an amount of beds for this, that, and the other thing. So I was just curious on that cost that could be related to the bridge or related to other places, and say, hey, you need to budget this amount of respite beds, and also on the concept of respite beds, even 24-hour beds, because some people, I believe, that are being released at 7 in the morning are really not healthy enough to be anywhere but where they are. So respite being, what a doctor says 2 days, but some people might need 2 or 3 weeks to get themselves strong enough to move forward. And I think if we're closing the doors at 7 and opening them up shuffling them in at 6 and throwing them out at 7, I think that just plays a role in that.
And I agree with you, and part of our discussions included, engaging the local shelter community on identifying ways that we might be able to incorporate kind of what Sue's talking about, which is this continuum of what respite really means and how we're defining it, and what shelters can do within their capacity, so.
Thank you.
So I think this is a perfect short term, and I think the DISD recommendation is a perfect short term, and so we've got 2 out of your group. I think I'm seeing people nod their heads. It seems like getting respite care built into the system and getting some services focused on our youth is really helpful. And then to the extent of the aging out of foster care thing comes up, Ricky, I think keep it moving. I'm sorry about that. Let's move to street outreach and then shelter and homelessness and the transition to youth.
So the first recommendation is for outreach, and it involves the formation of a crisis response team. And actually, one of the things that we were going to have this team work closely with an ACT team or an assertive community treatment team, which I thought Ron had said he was going to put in his recommendations. And I will say that the ACT team has been shown to maintain severely mentally ill people in housing, so I see it as an eviction preventive process, but we have a lot of overlap. So one of the things about Dallas's outreach is that we have some outreach occurring right now, but it is in little silos and it's not well coordinated. And so what the first step would be to coordinate this so that you would have individuals from multiple agencies that would actually function as if they had one agency for them. Another thing is that the coordinated assessment priority guidelines for housing have to guide the outreach efforts. So the outreach team would have access to a variety of resources and plan for initially shelter as quickly as possible with the ultimate goal of permanent housing based on the housing first model. Of course, all the data would have to go into the FDHA database for tracking. And I think the short and long-term goals with that are using what we have now much more effectively is a short-term goal, and then having a full-time outreach activity is the longer term as we add people to it. The next item we were asked to talk about was the encampment. If you look in your packets, City Crane's approach to encampment is attached. And our team pretty much had only a couple of comments to add to it. One of them I think first and most important is there has to be a specific reason to close an encampment. And the encampment would either be unsafe for the inhabitants or a public health risk. And so there we have to determine that risk. And then once the decision was made to close the encampment, it would take a 45-day minimum process to work through on that. You'll see in Cindy's information, she talks about bed availability for up to 50% of the people in the encampment. And one of the guidelines is that we still follow the coordinated assessment and housing priority list. Just because an encampment is closing, if you live in the encampment, does not move you up on the priority list to go where you belong. We encourage encampment closures around the first of the month for two reasons. One, individuals who receive checks, it gives them additional options of what their housing could be. And two, at least some of the shelters notice a slight dip in their population at the beginning of the month, and so would thus be more able to take encampment individuals with them. Yes.
So we need to definitely get this one discussed and reviewed, because I think this one we need to city council next week. We're trying to deal with this pressing and ongoing issue. And Bernie, or I guess like Dave Hogan down here, Bernie and Dave Hogan have worked with the city on the development of the protocol. Are you comfortable with the protocol that's been developed is the right way to go about it?
Well, the only snare may be that getting 50% of the population of the actual encampment population housing might be a real barrier to getting the encampment closed.
Is that within the policy of the party that?
Yes, I mean, the idea is that you would not close unless you had something specific available. And you sort of talked about what was reasonable and what would be likely to be enough to keep us from getting legal entanglements. And so the way it's written right now is only 50%. And I can't speak to what the city attorneys would say, whether or not that would be enough protection or not, but that's how it's written right now.
Does that mean 50% would need to have a housing plan? Is that right?
No, that we would, so if there are 100 people in the encampment, that at the time of closure, we would know that there were 50 available beds somewhere, so that the bridge would have 25 and Austin Street would have this. We wouldn't close unless you guys could say, or somebody could gather up enough beds that half the people could go inside.
I'm assuming in that situation, we could expand, we figure out a capacity expansion plan.
I just want to make sure I understand. I don't necessarily disagree, I just want to make sure I understand. So what I heard was the last encampment that closed, 3 out of nearly 80 people had a residential option, so that encampment would not have been closed.
I think it would have been closed because there was still shelter capacity available that people were choosing.
45 days, though.
Yeah, that was the
Yeah, but
problem.
there was extenuating circumstances. I mean, there was a murder, there was many other situations down there, which I think in these encampments, one of the things, if you want to keep them open, and I mean, I can empathize with her point, but there should be some type of order within the encampment, because what's happened is we step away from the encampment and we leave it to their own devices, and I can only speak of the one that was directly behind my shop. I mean, it was insanity back there. Now, if we're going to want to keep these encampments and allow these people to have some dignity, whatever dignity it is in that position, they have to be protected from others and themselves. So if you want to keep the encampments open, which I'm hearing that, obviously we're worried about this, that, and the other, lawsuit or whatever, why don't we devise a plan to put some type of patrol within the encampment? Because at that point, at least the people that are there that aren't the ne'er-do-wells, or the people that are really making the effort to move forward, are protected. Because anyone who knows anything about that encampment knows that there was prostitution, drugs, I mean, I can name a world of atrocities was in there. If you have some type of a semblance of order within, I think these encampments can actually have a functional service in lieu of this, because I agree, moving these people all over is not a resolve. To take them and push them down to 45, or to push them to Coombs, or push them to these different places, I don't think you're resolving anything.
Let me remind people kind of what the process is that was described here, which I think is consistent with what you're saying. Step one is a decision, after analysis and survey from the crisis response team and others, a decision is made that it's either unhealthy or unsafe environment and needs to be closed. That triggers a clock. And during the 45-day window, as much engagement occurs with the residents and as much housing gets developed for those residents, and they get put on notice, so the transition's not a horribly volatile one, and we get as many of those people out and into housing, ideally residential solutions, but we don't want to jump people that are, in line, and then it closes. But until, so what you said, it's bad stuff's going on in there, at that point, it would be time to close.
Right, however, if you provide some type of order within, because if there's some deterrent of these things going on, you get less press issues. I think you have a less, we went in on an interview, and we went in back in there, and when I first walked back in there, we were offered many services that probably shouldn't be offered. And then immediately, the cameraman pulled out his camera, and he was told, this is private property, you're not allowed to film here. Someone has told, I mean, there's some disconnect there, because it's private property, but it's not your private property. It's a series of disconnects, and I think you have people in there on a constant, and the trust builds, and you begin to have a conversation that's not with just some guy that stopped by once every week or something to that effect. So I think that's an effective part of these encampments, is to get some type of structure within that can help on the way out.
Okay, let's hear from others. Anyone else on this one?
The criteria in terms of the
Bernie.
So some of the criteria that we've used is obviously any kind of DPD, police calls, murders, we've had assaults, we had, prostitution, drug dealing, if we will gather that information. The other truly is a health issue. There's so much trash. There's leftover containers from well-intended folks feeding, that mice, we had a lot of rodents at the last closure.
Invaded right now.
A lot of feces, I mean, just a health condition. The big encampment, we even had pools of water that needed to be tested for mosquitoes and other disease, kind of concerns. And so all of that packaged together is what leads us to go, okay, we've got to do something here. That does not suggest that we're not already on the ground, and building that outreach team, the ACT team, is going to be important to engage as many people as possible so that we can get ahead of it, if you will. I know that seems long shot right now, but that we'll know everybody by name. We know they're in the HMI system, and the coordinated assessments are done. We know if they need a ID. We know if they're coming out of jail. We know what their situations are firsthand. And then if we had to close, we don't wonder where they're going to go or anything. We already have them on the radar screen, and we're already moving them towards getting housed or behavioral health or, something.
And that 45-day window is really an important thing, because it takes a lot of touch to get the right kind of outreach, the right kind of engagement, the right kind of consistency to move someone into either a shelter or into a housing environment. Okay, any other questions about the protocol?
Britton,
Yes.
will it make any difference on the property ownership, whether it's government property, private property, city, state, federal?
Bernie?
At this point, we have authority over our property, and the state has an agreement with us on their property. We do not have jurisdiction over private property. It really becomes whatever that private property owner, wants to do, kind of. I mean, we can get into codes issues, I guess. I see my attorney in the audience, so she's gonna look funny at me if I say something wrong.
There's one on Park Avenue, there was one on Hickory, and there were absentee landlords who really didn't care, but they were causing impact on?
Yeah, so I know that in the past, what's happened is codes or police will contact that owner and say, well, they have to put a no trespassing sign up or something like that in order for them to enforce against, folks just being on the property.
So if the property owner says, yeah, go ahead and remove that, that's what the 45-day will kick in?
Well, we won't engage the same way because we can't fence the world, and, we won't be able to fence that private property owner's property. So it'll just be a police action probably to say, okay, your property owner has a no trespassing, you need to move on.
It'll be a different process, probably.
Yes.
Same time frame.
No, it'll probably be a shorter time frame.
I
Yeah.
didn't notice there was an encampment in Uptown that was in.
So we have discussed putting a number to this. Like if there's 50 people, if there's 1 or 2 people, you're not going to end up engaging in this same way. But we really should hinge it, I believe, on a health and safety concern.
Okay.
That's one of the, just a best estimate, basically observation. The capacity exists. Say you had 100% of the people who are known to be sheltered homeless say, well, I want to get off the street. Is the capacity there? Could we deal with the problems?
Yeah.
If we had 100% agreement by the owners.
So
there's no short-term way.
Yeah, so here's the tightness of our shelter environment, because that's where the capacity would have to be drawn from, probably. Bob is the only shelter right now that has capacity. He's got 140 beds, so this is how tight it is. So if you had an encampment of 280 individuals, theoretically, 50% of them could be placed into Bob's capacity. Beyond that, though, we're not there. That's why we've got to get to these other subcommittee reports and get some strategies going. Yes?
A really quick two-part question. One, what is the process for the 45-day? Does a sign go up, and from that point on, it's considered 45 days? What's the notification process required for the time to start with the 45 days?
Right, we typically have identified the location as a health and safety concern. Yes, the signage for trespassing goes up first, and then that triggers your 45-day.
45 days from the time the sign goes up.
Right.
And then my second part question is, and this is probably more for you, talking again short term. One of the challenges is that we have had, and I know Jay and I have had this conversation, we've had people who have actually moved to one of the tent cities because they believe that they will go get a priority on the housing. How do we change that perception? Because even short term, if there's a way that we can do a better job getting that message out, whether it's a notice, whether it's part of, I don't know, but if we've got people who are leaving the shelter or who are moving there with the intent that they think they will get housing, it just creates more of a safety issue. So how do we combat that short term?
I don't know that you combat it short term, but if we all agree that we're not going to jump the housing list, and this is the way it is,
So has that perception, is that opinion because in the past we have made it a priority? In some cases, set that standard?
We have not, as a community, all agreed that we will house people according to the housing priority list. And that is one of the goals, I think, of this.
We're going to get to that
That
as a
needs to be done.
strategy. That's going
Okay.
to have to be an important strategy. Okay.
Thank you.
Other things on this, we really need to keep moving. People cool with the encampment closure policy? Okay, keep going.
Okay.
You've got a problem, Jim?
No, it's fine, I'll wait.
Okay, good.
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, so then we move into healthcare, and I apologize, I did send the wrong list. We do talk about medical respite, and so that's a high priority for us, and I won't reiterate it. We talk about medical services specifically to permanent supportive housing. I think that that sometimes we forget that when you go into permanent supportive housing, there's supposed to be wraparound services, and especially in the medical community, accessing the routine healthcare services is a difficult navigation, and I don't think it's appropriate when people first go into permanent supportive housing, to expect them to be able to negotiate the mainstream services. So I think medical care needs to be provided. We touched on certain types of physical disability documentation for Social Security disability benefits, and there is no provider of a specific physical disability part of the exam that does that without cost. It's not something that Parkland provides, and I think well, at least right now, the recommendation sits that if a medical provider felt that this was a necessary test in order to get disability insurance, disability benefits, that we would appeal to the flex fund of MDHA for that service. The last one in that group is chronic pain, which we haven't figured out, but is a big issue, and we'll try to work on that.
That was very well done, by the way. The things you haven't really fully figured out, we just need to move into the next one.
Then we're asked to talk about the scope delivery of behavioral health services, and our number one recommendation is the Assertive Community Treatment Team, or the ACT team. It's well grounded in the literature as a very successful approach, and I do think that Ron Stretcher is in one of his hats working on such a team. In deference to my colleague here, we did put in group homes licensing and inspection, and then I am adding into it with fines and penalties for non-compliance.
And that can be a short term, I would assume. Bernie?
Yeah, actually, that's already in play. Councilmember Griggs, that was one of his charges a year or two ago.
Okay, all right, that's good.
And then our last one has to do with quality scope delivery of substance abuse services. And so we haven't really fleshed that out, but we believe that increase in residential services is needed, or at least an increase in time in residential services is needed. We believe that Suboxone treatment for opioid addiction is needed, because that's not available to anyone without insurance, and the chronic pain is also in there. So that's where we are.
Excellent. So you had respite beds as a short-term strategy, the tent encampment, there's a combined short-term strategy, tent encampment as a short-term strategy, group homes we can look at as a short-term strategy, and that's very helpful.
What about a mobilized medical unit? I mean, because it seems that the blood drives do it and things to that effect. Have you considered that?
Parkland owns 5 mobile medical clinics and 1 mobile dental clinic, in addition to mobile.
So they position
mammography.
themselves at the encampments? Is that something they do?
We did serve I-45 during the time that it was part of the closing. We have not been asked to come to Coombs. We look to the outreach people, but the mobile clinics serve 28 locations throughout Dallas County, in addition to providing services at both the Bridge and the Stew Pot. So healthcare usually is not the limiting factor in the encampments.
Excellent. Jay?
Yeah, so shelter and crisis services. Bob Sweeney with Dallas Light is here, Karen Hughes with Bob Rocco, Karen Emerson, representing Stanley Grayson was here earlier, and Daniel Roby with Boston Street is out of town. And thanks again to Charlotte for the housing authority, you've been very helpful. We have been thinking, as Tanya mentioned, about quick impact and longer-term existing development. And we've been really trying to do that in an inclusive manner. I don't mean to say that we have gotten all that right, but we have invited commission members to come meet with guests at the Bridge. We've made sure that we had some of our committee members at each of the community engagement forums. We've met with local officials, we've surveyed providers, and we've got a couple hundred pages of local data and, models that we've looked at that we've really tried to document and make available. I don't know how helpful that is, Bob, it's probably too much, but we're trying to be inclusive and have, collaboration as one of our guiding principles, which I think is very important. That being said, we've got two primary strategies for short-term, and then the long-term is what you would expect, right? If we don't get enough housing, we need more shelter, which I think we'll work on that in the next session as we get a better sense on what the short-term with housing is going to be. But we do have some models for that, for how to go about that in an inclusive, community-based way. But that being said, the short-term strategies really are around clearing out the shelters and then making sure that we're fully utilizing the shelters. As you mentioned, we're close to that now, but close to that isn't enough when we have the needs that we have, right? We've got to keep improving until, we've got to move on to the next strategy. In order to turn over faster, there are a variety of things that we need to do. So right now we've got a system where we've got night shelters, we've got some 24-hour shelters with recovery and crisis services, and then we've got the bridge, which provides access to those things for people at night shelters who wouldn't otherwise have them. But we don't have resources to provide that for everybody. And we also don't have formal agreements with all of the local housing systems. So we have a formal agreement with the Housing Authority. We know how to get people Housing Authority housing, right? Now, we know there are challenges with the vouchers and all that, but at least we have a clear protocol. Now, we could resource it more and probably expedite some things, but at least we have a protocol. We also have that with the VA. We don't have it consistently with all housing providers. So working on that in a formal way and resourcing that should help us turn over quicker. The complementary side of that is we've got to develop more commonalities on the shelter side. So, that's everything from training and standards of care to assessments and referrals and follow-up protocols. We have a very, very diversified and specialized shelter system. So we've got per diem payments in the shelter system of $10 for a 24/7 cycle, and we've got per diem payments of $55, right? Literally everything we do at the bridge is independently audited, and we've got shelters that don't have any programmatic activities independently audited. So we do have a working agreement to start to establish some common structures for trainings, for standards of care, for delivery, for evaluation. And we want to begin working on that immediately because we do think it's important to be able to communicate about that. It's not going to be something that will finish immediately, but still we consider that a short term. And then if we can start resourcing that, align it with perhaps these other investments in housing navigators and other things, we think we can increase our housing placements through the shelter system by about a third, which would be another 300 a year into supportive housing. The second is to fully utilize our capacities, which currently are mostly at Dallas Life, but that could change later. We're not focusing exclusively on Dallas Light. We've identified perhaps, we have an opportunity at the bridge for respite care, but again, there could be other opportunities. But making sure that we're fully utilizing those things, that we're aligning populations with programs in a more formal way, and that we're resourcing that. And by and large, we feel like we can establish enough commonalities that we can get 85% of the people in need engaged. And as a result, we can fill up those unused beds plus some, as you mentioned. So it becomes a bit of a, if we work on the standards, the training, the protocols, then we got to have the resources, because somebody's got to pay for the meals, somebody's got to pay for the towel for, when the person showers. So there's a little bit of both and in both those short-term strategies. And then, as I mentioned, long-term, unfortunately, as of today, we have pretty strong indicators that we need additional domestic violence beds. That being said, we have irrefutable indicators that we need beds for youths, for families, for veterans, for single adults, just across the board. So We are reluctantly acknowledging that, as we are kind of reluctantly acknowledging that we've got such a wide disparity of resources. But the reality is, if we want people off the street and they don't have immediate access to housing, we've got to have shelter spots for them. And similarly, if we want people in shelters not to be flopping out on the streets doing K2, we've got to be able to engage them and serve them, right? We've got to be able to identify that need. And we've got gaps, right, between what we're doing now and the broader population. So we want to be honest about addressing that, but how far into those strategies we get, I think will depend on, we think will depend on how this group prioritizes generally, right?
So I think that's fair. So I attended their meeting the other day, and I thought it was a really good meeting, and the group does a great job of working together. So there's some short-term capacity issues that he addressed to get full utilization, if we can, in the system, and deal with the barriers and the commonalities of procedure that can be in an immediate bucket.
Right.
And then there's the longer-term bucket about building capacity across all these different segments and of subpopulations that in some ways will be a function of our effectiveness on our housing placement. Because if we place people into housing effectively, it takes the strain off of the shelter space. And so, any questions for Jay before we switch it to Larry to tell us what the answer is on that one?
Yeah.
Okay. To kind of kill two birds with one stone, we're talking about unsafe encampments and the lack of shelter capacity. Have you discussed at all having a city-sponsored structured encampment? That was one of the things that people talked about, where you can go there, be clean, have showers, that type of stuff, just have not to be indoors.
Right, right.
With a kind of a lead up to you, almost a captive population that you can then transition into housing.
Yeah. From my perspective, we had a bit of a legacy to deal with in that regard, and so that hasn't been one of our future thinking priorities, because most of us had been involved in some deliberation about using city property immediately before, the initial encampment shut down, looking at a state building that might be used on a temporary basis, trying to rent unoccupied hotels. And of course, we're very much aware of, the Dignity Field proposal, which isn't necessarily an encampment, but it includes some of that kind of theoretical approach. We have maintained that we need to strive to provide shelter in a fairly regulated sense, and what I mean by that is there are federal and state guidelines about what shelters need to be able to provide, and that includes a shower, right, and food, and access to crisis services. So it doesn't really fit, with the sanctioned encampment model. Now, that being said, we are broadly open to collaborating with just about anything that this broader group thinks will work, right?
Michael, let me respond, because you'll see if we can get to it. I'm not sure we can get to it. You'll see a strategy that basically says that we're going to put projects that are like that, converting city property into use against the needs around homelessness, into a feasibility analysis over the next 90 days. So we're going to actually take the time after we get through phase one immediate to unpack those projects one by one and get the city staff and others working on feasibility analysis.
Yeah.
Is that responsive?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Jay, have you guys considered bringing all of the shelters, because you're one of the more better funded shelters, obviously, in the city of Illinois. Have we considered bringing them together and setting mandates, short-term mandates that allow people, different admittance, asking for, some places are faith-based, some places have different reasons to come in. I think sobriety is an easy turn away, but is there a way with your financial wherewithal to go to a Dallas Life and say, we want 50 beds, we'll pay for the 50 beds, but we want them entered under our rules? We have, my example being each one of them, you have access to the beds, so should the bridge be overflowed, they're not forced to go to with all due respect, a religious-based deal where they're not comfortable, because I think that would be a deterrent. So is there a possibility within short-term to pay the per diem of 15 a bed at some of these places, or 60 like it is at your place, or something like that?
Yeah,
in the short term?
So we've had, as Britton noted, I think we've had very invested responses from all the shelters. And can we get more daytime capacity at a shelter? And what would that cost, and what would the associated standards for participation and care be? Similarly at night, right? How do we carve out from broadly recovery-oriented faith-based organizations night-by-night capacity, if there is, in fact, night-by-night capacity? And so that's exactly what we're talking about with that second set of fully utilizing capacity. That's exactly what we're talking about.
Okay.
It is mostly incentivized through just, altruism, right? And
Sure.
then the kind of reward of housing, and in some cases, there's a financial, maybe we can pay the pay to stay.
Well,
so
he
to
has
speak.
150 beds open,
Yeah.
and you have an open.
Jim, we're having that, we're all about that right now.
Right.
That was his first recommendation,
Right.
was to
Right.
figure out how to do that with him. Okay, and we got one more on the shelters, and then we got to move.
And I know you and I have talked about this a little bit,
Yeah.
but has there been a conversation, and what would it cost to take one of the downtown shelters 24/7? If we have a population, even a vulnerable population, I know we've talked about Austin Street, Austin Street, female and elderly. What would that cost, and is it realistic short-term to convert a shelter 24/7, so maybe a more vulnerable population isn't necessarily put outside, and that would certainly take some of the visibility off the streets while also serving a vulnerable population?
Right, so you mentioned there are about 2,000 shelter beds on an average night. Not all of those are for adults, but a lot are, the majority are. And we see about 2/3 of the adults at the bridge, so the others are, right, they're not participating in environments that we would hope for, right? Day shelter, recovery-oriented activities, so on and so forth. So we have started looking at day shelter. These assessments are focused on new local money. So new city money, new county money, and new private money. We also are having a conversation amongst the shelters about how to apply state and federal funds to do some of those things in lieu of the local money that we already have. So they're not in here yet, but we are working on it.
So if there
I
was-
talked to Daniel at Austin Street
Right.
about that very thing.
Yeah, so you are currently exploring that now?
Yes.
Of what would be the funding required? Because if nothing else, if we knew what was required, perhaps even explore other avenues to execute it short-term.
Yeah.
It's helpful. Okay, so I need a show of hands here of people that can give us about 10 more minutes. Larry, thank you. Okay, we're gonna go a little long, but we really need that space. So we're gonna convert the conversation from shelter capacity. Thanks to everybody, first of all, for all the amazing work and effort you put into this, to now housing. So Larry, give us a sense of where your group comes out on housing.
Okay, so I'm going to give a very brief report. I've got to go to the myself. We talked about the housing gap that we have. Our objective, if you look at page 1, is to close that gap by providing 2,000 units of permanent supportive housing. That would be 400 units annually, although the devil's in the details, so we get in the weeds here in a minute. We're going to see that the short-term strategy here, the immediate strategy, is to find 600 units of housing in this first, even before we get to the end of next year. And we're going to do that through a variety of methods. So that's our objective. Recommendation number 1, just scratch out. In view of the fact that Housing First is defined elsewhere in this report, that's not one of our recommendations any longer. And if you flip over on the next page to recommendation number 2, here's where we have a simple statement, and there's lots of detail under it, and we can go into it as much as you'd like. On the Housing Committee, would you guys raise your hands so everybody can see who you are? Thanks a lot for serving. Our illustrious chair also joined us on several of our meetings, and so he's got some information to weigh in on as well, I'm sure. So recommendation number one for us now is to fund a robust team of case managers, placement specialists to coordinate and execute on housing placements and work to deliver supportive services using an accepted vulnerability index to determine housing priorities on a case-by-case basis to all the homeless and formerly homeless persons with whom we work for initial street engagement, for personal integration, and acceptable housing community. And in addition to that, our strategy sees the engagement of a housing placement strategist who actually find landlords and apartments that will allow us to use our funds and our vouchers.
This is a strategy that I'm testing on the group that aligns with the housing subcommittee's immediate steps. So if you want a little more elaborative, you can take the time to read through that. I want to unpack a little bit more. So, Troy, unlocking the vouchers is a key part of this strategy. And so can you talk a little bit about whether you think an apartment navigation strategy can work, and whether if we incent the apartment managers and operators, it'll open up more units for permanent supportive housing?
Correct. I think, Britton, you're right on point with that. I think as the numbers bear out, and as we've talked about through these presentations, is that one of the things in terms of issuing the voucher is just the first step. The supply of available units, as we've talked about in the various community meetings of engagement, is a hard part to answer as well. And one of those is having landlords that are willing to accept a voucher. Given that we're in a climate we're 94% lease up in a rental market space, that's really a 100% lease up. And so we've got about 2,000 families that are out there with a voucher in their hand today that are currently out there searching for affordable housing, and they're not able to find it. And one of the primary reasons is that we don't have landlords that are willing to accept that voucher, one, because the market is tight, and then secondarily, there are some barriers in working with sometimes a bureaucracy such as us as a housing authority. And so having these case management services out there directly in line to go out, be proactive in our recruitment of landlords to identify units that we can tie specifically to this subset of a population helps us move the needle in terms of them getting the voucher and then actually finding a successful place in the market. So this is one very good strategy I think Britton and Larry have come up with, as well as the committee members, to talk about how do we impact and penetrate that market. And as we move forward, there's some other supplemental ways to address this with many times you'll see our families don't have security deposits, application fees, and so as we go through the presentation, there'll be some dialogue about that as well.
Yeah, so the idea here is because we have such a tight housing market and the landlords need to be incentive in order to open up existing units, we don't have a whole lot of permanent supportive housing in development, much at all. And we have this dynamic in Dallas. It's a legal dynamic. It's also a NIMBY dynamic. It's just a hard dynamic of getting development out of the ground. It just will take years and years and years. And if we don't attack a strategy like this immediately to get some housing it lined up against the vouchers that are available, we're going to find ourselves with the same backlog in Jay shelters and in Bob shelters, and we haven't been able to move people out of the shelters and into housing. And Ken can speak to the supportive services side of it in more particularity, but that's the idea that we focus first on our homeless veterans. We target that population. We target the landlords and say we're going to put our homeless veterans in your apartments, and we're going to do it as rapidly as we can, and using the VASH vouchers and the other vouchers. And then we're going to keep going down the list. And so here is what it looks like from a financial model, if you're interested in kind of getting more granular. So street outreach, these are the people that Larry referred to that would be in the encampments and be in the shelters. You can see the street shelter case managers. These are people that we hire as FTEs that engage with the homeless community and try and get the documentation lined up, try and basically be prepared to be their advocates and align their needs for housing and other needs against services. So then the second line is housing apartment managers. What we want to do is we want to staff up these people that are trained at finding apartment units. We had a success with one guy, Charles Gully, at I-45 encampment, that was able to turn over a lot of apartments. Larry, you've had recent success.
We placed 8 people last week. We intend to place probably 10 more by the end of the month. We've had meetings with apartment association groups, and they're really hungry to fill that 6% vacancy. And so if you think about that, we just have to work smarter and harder to find the units, but they're there. And we have trade association groups saying to us, we'll work with you, we'll help you identify willing landlords, et cetera, et cetera. Found 30 apartments in Pleasant Grove yesterday, maybe, just in a kind of a random email exchange that Troy and I were copied on. And so we're going to go talk to those people.
But the point is, if we don't put professionals against this task, we're just going to be wandering around in the wilderness, hoping an apartment surfaces.
To the point about recent success, we had some HCC money that allowed us to engage 6 new street outreach workers, and that's why we're moving the needle on this. They were also able to register every single person in encampment 2 and get them in HMIS so we can begin to go after them and find them and get them into housing. But you got to have people to do that work.
So this is an immediate strategy. Let's go with Tanya and then Ricky. This is important. This is probably the most important thing we're going to be unpacking today, probably.
The number one response from the surveys was the need for housing, but specifically it was housing spread throughout the city as a citywide responsibility. How is your proposal and how are we strategizing to take the housing approach citywide?
So what's beautiful about this? That's a great question.
Definitely our vision is to take it citywide into every council district as we can.
It's a scatter site model, so you're able just to...
Even into the county. Richardson, Garland, Irving, other places where there are units available. So absolutely, our strategy is to scatter and then to follow up with the team that we build.
Ricky.
Dr. Jones, the expert in homelessness, gave a whole class on this. And the incentives are apartment managers do not like to turn apartments. So if they're turning a certain percentage of apartments every month, we're going to help you reduce that number and help you make more money. Okay? You don't come to the apartment manager and say, I got a homeless person here that needs an apartment. You say, I've got a client that needs an apartment. Also, apartment complex usually have 1 or 2 units that nobody wants for some reason. It's near the dumpster, it's downstairs, it's by a train, or it's by the highway. And so those are the apartments you target, is the one that they can't lease because nobody wants it. And so those are some of the incentives that Dr. Joe brought out.
Yeah. Okay, so that's helpful. Which one of you goes first? Tanya goes first.
The 600 units in the next year, have those units already been identified? Are they under construction or are they?
They exist.
They exist.
They're already in the private market. And part of our team's focus would be to go after those, find those units and go after them.
And how many units, if it's 600 units in the next year, is there a certain percentage that you say could be placed in, say, the next 6 months?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the idea here, it's like a surge strategy, a shock jump start to our system to get the housing moving. And we don't know the answers to your questions with a definitive response, but we do know we can't just all kind of sit around here and not go find these units. And we also know that without investing in a staff of customer service people that are out pulling them in and are incented to pull them in, not only for these populations, but for our entire homeless population, then we're not going to be able to move the needle. We'll be stuck where we are with a housing dynamic that we can't unlock. And so I think it's a pilot program. I think we invest in it. I think we get it going. And we then, after a year, evaluate it. And if we've gotten 600, what we've done is relieve the shelter anxiety greatly. We were able to kind of get a flow. And then, the idea of building how many units? 2,000 units? If you do the math on that, that's 2,000 times $140,000 a unit. That's $280 million of investment that we would have to figure out a way to make happen and then deploy.
Maybe evaluate sooner. I think, in some cases, we go too long.
Yeah.
Maybe we, every 6 months, evaluate and adapt as necessary.
Well, that's the beauty of this, because we're going to hopefully work with Troy and DHA, and they're going to turn a metric around for us
And to the
every
Houston,
90 days.
to the Houston model, that's exactly what they did. We're talking about the alignment of existing resources that are not effectively being utilized because we don't have a piece of the puzzle we need, which is brokers, finders.
That's a question. Have you considered at all engaging real estate investment professionals?
Sure. I thought that
to the
is
models
something
of
moving.
their acquisition.
At this point, we'll engage almost anybody who can help us move the needle on this.
So, so the
I would just caution us there, though, because sometimes our families get susceptible to predatory practices. So one caution that I would have, or two actually, would be if we over-incent property owners, then that becomes an immediate gouge to the marketplace. And so every private market owner is going to look for some exceptions in every case, and that can't be the way, because then we're going to create a market that's even higher than what it currently is. And then secondly, I think we have to be strategic in identifying how we partner our clients up with potential folks to help them find housing assistance, because sometimes it's been my experience that families get taken advantage of on that side as well. So we just need to make sure that that's vetted through carefully before we just say that that should be carte blanche.
Yeah, and my assumption is that there'll be controls in place around all of that, so that there'll be accountability that'll flow up and down the system. The other thing I think that is worth noting is Larry and I, and maybe others were in that meeting, we actually assembled the 7 or 8 largest apartment operators in North Texas, and we asked them to tell us, what they could do. And I think there's a strong receptivity on the part of the market to help us solve the problem if we can get it right. They're looking for answers, as we all are, and the idea that we just shove hard development policies on them and say it's hard and fast, it's the deal, you get pushback. But if you come up with a reasonable strategy that's using B, C, and D grade, inventory, I think we're going to be able to hopefully have some success.
Using the vouchers, can you use them in, say, an extended stay, hotel type situation, those who don't need
Not the voucher.
Okay, before we get to
That's
that,
more of a transitional type use.
so services, Ken works for MetroCare. Ken would be the type of organization that would come in and provide services. And what I heard from the apartment managers is these services need to be robust. You can't put a vulnerable client in my apartment and then leave them and not provide the supportive services. So can you speak, Ken, to your capacity and your industry's capacity to meet the need?
I think locally we have the infrastructure to execute the robust services. The issue is that the financing. So I think what we're talking about here is putting together a package of financing to support that. If I had the money, and I can speak, I think, for City Square and others in the industry, if we had the money, we could have this going tomorrow as far as the support, because it's just a matter of putting the people out there and hiring some people and training if we needed more people. But we have the policies and procedures, and we've done this. This is already ongoing. We're just struggling financially.
Yep. Can we unpack that? So Bernie, talk a little bit about the HCC grant money that we might be able to unlock against supportive services. This is state money that's in a pot right now, and we aren't deploying it.
Okay, but I'm trying to get a question out real quick before she does that. I see the financial numbers here, and I don't know what a voucher's worth. I mean, I'm a little...
Yeah, I can tell you. So it's $600
per month.
Average.
Per month, right?
Per month.
So that's $7,200 per year.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Times 600.
Right, that's a large number. If we have that amount of funds available to us, and we have DISD properties, and we have properties that are available, in the short term, wouldn't it be common sense to take some of that money and retrofit these places to get the people off the street in the interim until you get to your 600? Because all I'm hearing is there's no property, but yet I've seen, and I believe Tanya will agree, we've seen multitudes of properties that would fit the need short-term, allowing you to get to the 2,000 units, allowing you to do those things. I'm not seeing
So
any
we think
conversation.
there's apartments that are out there right now where we won't have to do that, but if we have to.
Unfortunately, you
Yeah.
can't use that money that way.
Yeah, the
The
vouchers-
federal government doesn't allow you to use that money in that manner. So you can't do it.
You can't because it's never been done, or you can't because.
You can't, the money's not allowed for that. It's
So you-
for a subsidy to the
There's
family.
no government-owned housing.
You gotta say we
No,
can do that.
that wasn't the question you
But
posed.
that's what I'm saying, the
Yeah.
government, if the government has the money available to them via vouchers or via whatever it is, you can't invest it into a property that you can maintain and control the costs on?
No, not under the voucher program.
Okay, so Bernie,
So I think just in general, not specific about specific pots of money, but I want to encourage everybody that I believe the resources are out there. I think we need to circle the wagons, on that, because money can be used in different ways, and we can slot it in different ways. We just have to decide what that means. Here's your strategy. All you guys have run your committees. All of the work is truly impressive. And so we just say, okay, we need X. What pots of money do I have to deploy to X? We need Y. We need the permanent supportive housing. That's a big ticket item. And I know we've slotted about 140 per unit, but the city's not the only place to get it. Typically, those developments stack private financing and tax credits and bonds and things like that are sort of free money that you don't have to repay. And so we just need to decide what you need and then start to look at what resources can go against each particular thing.
so Gary, and I guess I'd like to make sure we have consensus on this, because before we take this short-term kind of targeted approach to the city council, I don't want to feel like we didn't check the box of consensus. Are people in support of this concept?
I can't see it.
Does it make sense? Okay. Anyone? Speak now.
What's the bottom total?
The bottom total is $5,815,000. If you go to the next slide, you can see where dollars are available right now. So the top line would be theoretically, Bernie, you've not seen this, an amount that the city would help us with, because the HCC grant money can't go against that scope of work. But the HCC grant money that the state is holding right now through us can go against the other scope of work that we're trying to get done through this. It's coming to you.
Yeah.
Can I ask one last question? I know we've talked through several short-term solutions through a lot of the different groups. It would be helpful between now and next week to get a cost for some of those items,
Yeah.
to be able to tally, and to kind of piggyback on Bernie. I know people kind of roll their eyes when I say this, but, it's been such an education process the last few weeks, the last 8 weeks, even since we've started meeting. In my opinion, I think there's been some wonderful conversations that have come out of it. A lot of our groups have been working very closely together, certainly the community. I believe there's money out there. I believe there's private money out there. I think we have done a really poor job of talking about it because of the stigmas attached. And I think by continuing to educate and have these conversations, I truly believe that we'll find some money if we know what it costs, we know the timeline, and we know what's required to get there short term.
Yep.
So, I would encourage to keep having those conversations, but anything we can do to get a short-term time capsule of, say, the next 6 months of what some of these things would cost.
Yep. So I'm going to, the prerogative of the chair, sorry, Gary, I'm just got to figure out a way before everyone wraps up and goes to share with you at least our best thinking on strategies. There's 5 of them. This is one of them. This is an immediate strategy. If you look at the underline right there, to your point. The number one strategy is, we've spoken about it already. It's a community-wide coordinated assessment in single system HMIS. Casey, this was going to be your recommendation of your group, more or less. And so, you get the prioritization next time. But so that's number one. Everything I'm hearing is if we don't get our community aligned against this, then we're not going to be able to really move forward. I can explain this at another time. Facility development, shelter capacity, that's what some of you were talking about. How do we find the buildings, and how do we maybe use the buildings, and how do we maybe think about shelter? All of this, I think, is intermediate, but we need to work on it, and we're going to put it into a feasibility analysis. It would include Dignity Field, it would include whatever other ideas people have relative to converting property, but we just can't get that done in 8 weeks. I mean, that's just a project scope that's much more significant, and Kelly's going to help us with that. This is your issue, Larry, your group's issue relative to the long term. It's immediate, intermediate, and long term, but the conversations that are being had around inclusionary zoning policies that Bernie and the Housing Committee are dealing with right now with the new development is critically important to this. Where that calibrates is going to mean we'll either have affordable housing stock developed in our community over time naturally, or we won't. And so this is something over the next 90 days that we have to keep our eye on. And then this is the big one, I think.
Go back to the last slide.
Yeah.
Did you guys model acquisition and conversion at the same cost as new construction?
No.
That's what you're saying.
Oh, we've got it at 140K per unit. Yeah, that's going to be less, I think.
It should be substantially less.
Yeah. So then the last thing is this, I'm hearing this from everybody. There's a lack of a system of accountability. And so whatever we end up with as a strategy on the backside of this work, if it doesn't build or suggest a strong system of accountability for all the players, particularly those receiving public dollars, then I think we will have probably missed the opportunity. So I wanted to take more time on these 5 things. Didn't have it, but it's okay. They'll be sent to you. Does anyone have comments about any of the 5 right now? You think we're on the mark, or?
Based on the mark, probably the top of back all of the.
Yeah, yeah. Any other thoughts about any of that?
There's not enough information. I mean, it looks, on the surface, it looks good. I just don't have enough information.
Okay. So what we'll do is we'll try and take these recommendations for purposes of how we develop a straw, set of documents to feed back to you. We'll take the recommendations and we'll put them against the strategies. So you'll see this broad strategy, and then you'll see kind of how that recommendation fits. It's been unpacked by the various groups. And then you get a chance to look at it, and we'll come back next week and hopefully be able to reach full consensus on what that package looks like. And you'll have, several days, hopefully as much as a week, to try and do whatever research you want to do, and meet again as a subcommittee if you need to. So thank you very much for your time. Sorry I took you long, 10 minutes. This concludes a long day.
Long month, long year.
This is William, hopefully your favorite videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like, follow, or subscribe to us and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call.